Imagine standing in front of two burning buildings. In one, a stranger. In the other, your pet. You can only save one. There's no time for heroics, no loophole, no hidden solution. Just you, the flames, and an impossible decision. This is what control often looks like, not a gun to your head, but a question with no right answer. When someone wants to manipulate you, they don't always use force, they use false dilemmas, traps dressed as choices. Because when both options are bad, you're not really choosing, you're surviving. Politicians do this masterfully. Do you want higher taxes or worse healthcare? Do you want freedom or safety? Framed like this, you feel involved, empowered even. But the real trick is what's left off the table. A better system, a third path. The one you'd actually choose if you weren't being cornered. Marketers do it too. Buy now or miss out forever. Be a loser or own this product. The message isn't subtle. Pick one nightmare or the lesser evil. And in your panic you choose, because something feels better than nothing. But nothing is exactly what you were supposed to feel. Powerless. Trapped. Like your only role is to decide how you lose. This tactic thrives in abusive relationships too. Either you trust me completely, or you don't love me. Either you do this for me, or you're selfish. It's not about choices, it's about obedience. The illusion of choice is the perfect leash. You're made to feel like you chose your own cage. And when you're forced to pick between two bad options, something deeper happens inside you. You begin to normalize suffering. You begin to believe this is just how life works. That every path is pain, so stop asking for comfort. That every system is rigged, so stop dreaming of fairness. You start adapting to a world you should be resisting, and worse, you start defending your decision. Because the alternative is unbearable to admit you were manipulated, used, cornered. So instead, you convince yourself it was the right call. You make peace with the damage. You forget there was ever anything else. This is what makes the trap so enduring. It rewrites your memory, it reshapes your morality, and it makes you easier to manipulate next time. History is littered with these moments. Populations given two terrible choices, submission or war, obedience or exile, starvation or corruption. And each time people chose, not because they wanted to, but because they felt they had no choice at all. That's what makes it so insidious. When people control your options, they control your morality. They hijack your compass, and you call it direction. But it's not real choice if it's rigged from the start. Real choice means alternatives that don't crush your soul. Options that let you keep your dignity. Real choice respects you. Manipulation doesn't. So the next time you're faced with a dilemma that feels wrong, no matter what you pick, stop. Don't rush. Don't panic. Ask who benefits from this decision. Who framed the question? Who told me these were the only two doors? Because maybe the real act of rebellion isn't choosing between two evils. Maybe it's refusing to play the game at all. And the moment you see the trap for what it is, you change everything. You go from victim to observer, from pawn to player. You take back control, not by choosing, but by refusing the lie of choice altogether. Some people will say you're indecisive, that you're avoiding reality, but you'll know better. You'll know that real power doesn't come from choosing between two bad outcomes. It comes from demanding better ones. You just have to remember, you're allowed to walk away from the question. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to want more. And the moment you do, their game starts to fall apart. Because the most dangerous person is the one who refuses to pick a side in someone else's rigged war. They want you tired, reactive, predictable. But you see the edges now. And when you can see the edges, you can step outside them. They made you choose between pain and guilt. Now watch what happens when you choose neither. If that unsettled you, good, because next you're going to learn why people would rather have blind loyalty than inconvenient truth, and what they're willing to give you if you play along. Reward loyalty more than truth. It sounds corrupt, doesn't it? Like something whispered in the dark halls of power. But it's not just a political tactic, it's a psychological law. One that governs families, corporations, institutions, and even your closest relationships. The reason is simple: truth is dangerous. Loyalty is safe, think about it. Truth challenges. It questions the story. It disrupts the script. But loyalty protects the story, defends the group, shields the system. That's why those in power don't promote honesty. They reward allegiance, and they always have. In ancient kingdoms, the messenger who brought bad news was killed, while the sycophant who praised the king's wisdom got promoted. Not because the king didn't care about reality, but because he cared more about perception. Power isn't built on truth. It's built on consistency. And loyalty, no matter how irrational, offers that in abundance. You see this in everyday life. A manager overlooks a loyal employee's incompetence, but fires the honest one who spoke up. A parent punishes the child who tells the truth if it threatens the family image. A friend distances themselves not from the liar, but from the one who revealed the lie. Truth has a cost. Loyalty pays dividends. Even in your own life, there's a tension between the two. How many times have you bitten your tongue to avoid offending someone? How often have you nodded in agreement, not because you believed, but because you didn't want to be seen as disloyal? This isn't cowardice, it's conditioning. From a young age, you're taught to prioritize harmony over honesty, to respect authority, which often means don't challenge authority, to be a team player, which often means don't rock the boat. And the result? You learn that truth, raw, unfiltered truth, is socially dangerous, because it is. Truth exposes hypocrisy. Truth questions loyalty. Truth makes people uncomfortable. But loyalty is soothing. It says, I'm with you, no matter what. And for most people, that's worth more than being right. Think about whistleblowers. We hail them as heroes after they're destroyed. Most lose their jobs, their friends, their reputations. Why? Because they valued truth over loyalty. And society doesn't like that. Not really. Even in movements that claim to value truth, loyalty comes first. Try questioning the orthodoxy of any political tribe, and you'll see how quickly the truth becomes irrelevant. The moment your honesty threatens the in-group narrative, you're an enemy, because the system doesn't reward truth. It punishes disruption. This is how power maintains itself, not through suppression alone, but through selective reward. It elevates the loyal, even when they lie. It silences the truthful, especially when they don't. And here's the darkest part. You already know this. That's why you hesitate before speaking your mind. Why you soften your opinions, hedge your criticisms, choose silence over confrontation. Because deep down, you've learned the truth doesn't protect you. Loyalty does. Even in relationships, this rule holds. A partner may lie to preserve harmony, while the one who tells the painful truth risks the entire bond. Families preserve secrets, not because they're healthy, but because loyalty demands it. And when someone breaks that code, when they tell the truth, they're often the villain in the story. But why is this so universal? Because groups survive through cohesion, not accuracy. A tribe that tears itself apart over every uncomfortable fact doesn't last. But a tribe that punishes dissent and rewards loyalty, even blind loyalty, creates unity. Fragile, artificial unity, but unity all the same. This is the quiet trade-off built into every institution, every culture: stability over reality, order over truth. So what do? You could reject loyalty, embrace truth at all costs, live by radical honesty. But be warned, it will make you an outsider. You will lose people, you will lose jobs, you will become a threat. Or you could embrace loyalty, play the game, say what's expected, protect the image. You'll be safer, more accepted. But at what cost? That's the trap. There's no easy answer, only a question you'll ask yourself over and over again. What do I value more, truth or belonging? Because in the world we live in, you rarely get both. And if you ever wonder why things stay broken, why systems never change, why injustice persists, it's because people who tell the truth get punished. And people who stay loyal, even to lies, get everything they want. You're not rewarded for being right. You're rewarded for being on the right side. And the longer you live in this reality, the more you'll see that truth isn't power. Loyalty is. You think this is the end of the manipulation. It's not. You're about to see how even the design of your choices, the very options you think you're freely selecting, are built to benefit someone else entirely. Keep listening. You haven't seen how deep the game goes. They don't hide it. They just design it so well, you never think to look. Control doesn't always come from brute force or obvious coercion. The most effective control, sustainable, silent, undetected, comes from design. Systems, structures, interfaces, policies, they aren't neutral. They're shaped deliberately to benefit someone. And almost always that someone isn't you. Start with architecture. Ever noticed how park benches now have dividers? Not for your comfort, for your compliance. These metal bumps ensure homeless people can't lie down. It's called hostile architecture, and it's designed to make discomfort look like order. The space seems clean, safe, modern, but it's really just sanitized cruelty, built to invisibly exclude. Design can decide who feels welcome and who feels unwelcome, who gets access, who gets delayed, who gets denied. And because it's baked into the environment, it feels natural. You don't question it, you just adjust. Now zoom out, think about bureaucracy. Paperwork, procedures, protocols. They aren't just slow by accident, they're slow by design. Confusing forms, endless wait times, obscure language. These aren't flaws, they're filters. They tire you out, make you give up. Every obstacle you face is friction that benefits someone else, the landlord, the corporation, the gatekeeper. If you don't finish the form, they win by default. This is the genius of design-based control. It makes exploitation look like efficiency. It makes injustice feel like policy. Even your phone isn't neutral. Apps are engineered to trap your attention. Infinite scroll, notification badges, autoplay, each feature designed to keep you watching, swiping, consuming. You're not the customer, you're the product. Your behavior is the commodity. And every micro decision you make, every time you reach for your phone instead of questioning your environment, is a small surrender and money. That's where the design becomes lethal. The financial system is built like a casino, but one where the house always wins, and you don't even know the rules. Credit cards, interest rates, late fees, they're structured to turn your confusion into someone else's profit. You're not meant to understand how compounding debt works, because if you did, you might stop playing. Think of healthcare, or housing, or education. Basic needs, structured like privilege. Not broken systems, working exactly as designed. If the result of a system consistently benefits a small group and burdens the rest, It's not a flaw. It's a feature engineered to preserve control, justify inequality, and gaslight you into thinking it's all just how things are. This goes even deeper. Political districts are drawn to dilute your vote. Insurance policies are written to avoid paying you. User agreements are designed so you never read them. Every inch of the modern world has been carved by invisible hands that don't want your freedom. They want your predictability, your quiet obedience. Even choice itself is manipulated. You're bombarded with superficial options, this phone or that phone, this brand or that brand. But real choices, the ones that matter, like how your data's used or how policies are made, are hidden, already decided. Choice becomes a costume for control. And here's the trick. Because these designs don't shout, they whisper. You blame yourself. You think you're the problem, that you didn't try hard enough, that you should have read the fine print, worked longer hours, taken better care of your health. You internalize the consequences of a rigged design as personal failures. This is by design too, because if you see the design, you might resist it. You might stop blaming yourself and start blaming the structure. And once that happens, control slips. The illusion cracks. They don't need to imprison you if they can program you. They don't need to punish you if they can shape the world around you so precisely that resistance feels pointless. So next time you feel exhausted, confused, overwhelmed, ask yourself, who benefits from your fatigue? Who profits from your confusion? Who gains from your compliance? Because control doesn't need to announce itself. It only needs you not to notice. You were never meant to win. You were meant to obey, but you've seen the blueprint now, and now you have a choice. They made the rules, but you don't have to play by them forever. You just have to see them for what they really are. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you're no longer just another piece in the design. You're the glitch in the system. You're the error they didn't plan for. You're the one thing they fear most. Someone who finally noticed. You feel that, don't you? Not just anger, not just betrayal, but potential. Something is shifting, and it's not random. You're not losing your mind. You're finding it. What happens next is entirely up to you. But before you decide, ask yourself one more thing. What if the solution they offer is just another design? You'll want to keep listening for this part, because what comes next is exactly how they trap you again. Have you ever noticed how some problems seem too perfectly designed, like they were made just to sell you the cure? You've probably seen it. The miracle diet that follows a campaign convincing you your body is broken. The anti-aging cream, right after the media, floods your feed with panic about wrinkles. The security system, the insurance plan, the self-help guru, every fix begins with a fear, a flaw, a failure. And most of the time, that failure is manufactured. This is one of the oldest manipulations in human history. Create the wound, then sell the bandage. The trick isn't just in the solution. It's in engineering the desperation. Let's break it down. Imagine you live in a peaceful neighborhood. No thefts, no danger, no drama. Then one night, you get a flyer. Break-ins on the rise. Protect your home now. It doesn't matter if the danger is real. The fear is planted. And when fear grows, reason withers. You start imagining shadows outside your window, footsteps on your driveway. Suddenly, the $700 security system doesn't seem excessive. It seems essential. You weren't reacting to a real event. You were reacting to a narrative, one that was sold to you. Fear is profitable. Insecurity is scalable. If someone can convince you there's a problem, especially a personal one, they can sell you the illusion of control. This happens in the beauty industry, in politics, in tech, even in personal relationships. First, they make you feel broken. Then they offer to fix you. Why is it so effective? Because once someone defines the problem, they control the solution. You stop asking whether the problem even existed in the first place. You're too busy trying to solve it. Social media is the perfect laboratory for this tactic. Platforms amplify insecurities in high definition. Your body isn't toned enough, your house isn't aesthetic enough, your mindset isn't optimized enough. Every scroll is a whisper, you're not enough. But don't worry, we have the supplement, the planner, the course, the app. Just click, just buy, just obey. You become trapped in a loop. Dissatisfaction followed by consumption. Fix after fix after fix. But somehow you never feel fixed. And here's the psychological twist. Even when the solution fails, you blame yourself. Not the scam, not the seller. You. You didn't try hard enough. You didn't use it right. Maybe the problem was just bigger than you thought, so you buy another fix. You try again. You stay loyal to the illusion. It goes deeper. Even societal issues follow this formula. Politicians exaggerate threats to public safety, then offer policies that just happen to boost their own power. Corporations lobby for problems to be reframed in ways that only their products can solve. Climate change becomes your fault because you didn't recycle enough plastic bottles, not the fault of a billion-dollar industry pouring chemicals into rivers. It's all about direction. As long as your attention is focused on fixing the problem they defined, you're not looking at the system that created it. You're too busy cleaning up a mess to ask who made it. Now look at personal relationships. Emotional manipulators do this too. They subtly criticize you, isolate you, plant doubts. Then they present themselves as your savior. They convince you you're too needy, too sensitive, too much, then offer conditional love that feels like safety. But it's not love, it's leverage. This isn't just a tactic, it's a cycle, a feedback loop. The more fixes you buy, the more problems they'll create. Not because they hate you, but because they need you dependent. A satisfied person is a bad customer. A confident person is a dangerous voter. An aware person is hard to manipulate. You start by questioning the problem itself before asking, how do I fix this? Ask, who told me this was broken? Follow the money, trace the benefit. Ask who gains from your panic, your shame, your desperation. When you reclaim your definition of what's broken, you reclaim the power to decide what needs fixing and what never did. Because the truth is, most of the things you've been convinced to fear were just cleverly packaged opportunities for control. The weight, the wrinkles, the anxiety, the outrage, none of it was neutral. It was marketed. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You begin to recognize the artificial emergencies, the synthetic solutions. You start to feel the difference between fear you chose and fear you were sold. And in that moment, the spell begins to break. Because the next time someone tries to sell you salvation, you'll know to ask, who made me feel like I needed saving in the first place? You're not broken. You're just being sold a fix for a problem they created on purpose. And if that makes you angry, good, hold on to that. Because the next part, it gets even darker. They won't just sell you a problem, they'll blur the line between your deepest desires and your quietest obedience. And once that line disappears, you won't even know who you're obeying anymore, or why. Have you ever asked yourself why the need to belong feels so overwhelming? Not just desire, but need, that bone-deep craving to be seen, accepted, part of something. It's not just emotional, it's survival. The brain is wired to interpret rejection as danger. To be excluded is to risk death. And so, we adapt, we mimic, we comply. But here's the dark twist. What if that primal hunger for belonging is exactly what makes you obedient? Think back to school. You learned early that praise came with conformity. Question too much, Disrupt the group? You weren't just corrected, you were isolated, labeled difficult, different. Belonging wasn't unconditional. It came with terms that taught you to blend in, not stand out. This is where it starts, the quiet erosion of dissent. Belonging becomes a leash, and the leash gets tighter with age. In the workplace, your survival depends on being liked, not just competent. Likeable, agreeable. A team player, raise your hand too often, challenge authority or suggest a different path, and suddenly you're not a fit. The group closes in, you're left out of meetings. Invisible in conversations. You're still there, but somehow not part of the tribe. So you learn to shrink, to edit your opinions before they leave your mouth, to nod when you disagree, not because you're weak, but because you understand the rules of survival. And here's the trick, no one tells you. Obedience hides in your silence. But it's worse than that, because over time, the line between belonging and obedience begins to blur, and you don't even see it happening. You think you're being loyal, supportive, cooperative, but what you're really doing is sacrificing autonomy for acceptance. You're choosing not to speak, not to resist, not to stand out, because you fear the cost of exclusion more than the cost of submission. And this is the part that should scare you. You don't just obey others, you start obeying yourself. Your inner voice becomes a filter, screening out anything that could threaten your place in the group. You become your own enforcer, preemptively erasing your real thoughts before anyone else ever hears them. And society rewards you for it. It praises your professionalism, your maturity, your ability to keep the peace. But beneath that praise is a terrifying truth. You're not being celebrated for who you are. You're being rewarded for how well you disappear. This is how systems maintain control. Not through overt force, but through psychological conditioning. They don't need to silence you directly if you've already silenced yourself. Look at religion. Look at politics. Look at culture. Belonging always comes wrapped in expectation. To be part of us, you must reject them. Loyalty is measured by how well you follow, not how deeply you think. This is how ideology becomes obedience. It doesn't demand worship. It demands conformity. And the scariest part, it feels good. It feels righteous. Because once you've invested your identity into a group, any act of dissent feels like betrayal, not just of them, but of yourself. You don't just fear being rejected, you fear losing who you are. But ask yourself this, if who you are depends entirely on who you're with. Have you ever really been you, or have you been a collection of permissions, only as real as your last approval? This is where the cost becomes unbearable. You sacrifice authenticity for acceptance. And once that trade becomes a habit, you lose the ability to tell the difference. You no longer know if you agree, or if you're just afraid not to. You no longer ask what's right, only what's acceptable. Belonging becomes the cage you built yourself. So how do you escape it? By learning to separate connection from control, by understanding that true belonging doesn't demand your silence. It welcomes your voice. It doesn't require obedience. It thrives on truth. And if your sense of community demands your conformity, then it was never community. It was just a prettier word for control. You can belong without betraying yourself, but only if you're willing to risk the discomfort of standing alone. Because sometimes the loneliest thing you can do is finally be honest. And sometimes that's the only way you'll ever really belong. You feel that unease building now, don't you? That question you've been avoiding for years. Let it rise, because the next step forces you to look directly at what you've been taught to romanticize. You're about to see how morality itself can be twisted into submission. Don't look away now. Imagine a culture where the highest form of morality is self-erasure, where goodness is measured not by the lives you enrich, but by how much of yourself you're willing to give up. Your time, your energy, your dreams, even your identity. We call it sacrifice. From an early age, you're taught that the more you suffer for others, the more righteous you are. That giving everything you have, even when it breaks you, is a moral victory. That a good person is someone who says yes to pain, to overwork, to silence, especially silence. But here's the question. Who benefits when you define morality as self-destruction? Not you. Sacrifice, when normalized as virtue, becomes a control mechanism, a leash disguised as a halo. Think of the people celebrated as heroes. The mother who gave up her life for her children. The worker who never took a sick day. The friend who always shows up, even when they're breaking inside. Their stories aren't just admired. They're held up as standards. Be like them. Be selfless. Be exhausted. Be invisible. And if you're not, then you're selfish. Cold, unworthy. Because in a system that worships sacrifice, self-preservation becomes a sin. But let's be clear. Sacrifice is only called moral when it comes from people who don't hold power. When a billionaire hoards wealth, they're ambitious. When a poor person can't afford to help their neighbor, they're immoral. When a mother leaves her family to pursue her dream, she's judged. But when a father works 80 hours a week and never sees his kids, he's praised for providing. It's not about ethics, it's about obedience. Morality has been rigged. You're not told to sacrifice because it's right. You're told to sacrifice because it keeps things running. Quietly, predictably, with the same people in charge. Normalize sacrifice as morality. And you don't need to build prisons. People will police themselves. They'll work overtime without complaint. They'll silence their needs in relationships. They'll say yes when they mean no, all while calling it love, duty, virtue. This isn't morality. It's emotional labor, weaponized. Even religion, at its worst, amplifies this. The promise of redemption, salvation, or purpose becomes tied to how much you're willing to give up. Not how much you create, not how much joy you spread, but how much you bleed. You're taught that the path to goodness is paved with suffering. But suffering isn't sacred, it's just efficient. A population that believes morality means self-sacrifice is a population that won't rebel, won't rest, won't ask for more. And if they do, they'll feel guilty for it. But what if you flipped the equation? What if morality wasn't about how much you gave up, but how much you refused to abandon yourself? What if goodness meant protecting your energy so you could sustain real change? What if it meant saying no when the world demands you disappear? That version of morality doesn't serve power. It threatens it, because it redefines what it means to be good. Not silent, but outspoken. Not obedient, but awake. Not exhausted, but alive. So the next time you're praised for sacrifice, pause, ask who gains from your suffering. Ask what it's costing you. And most of all, ask why a system that truly valued your well-being keeps insisting you give more, even when there's nothing left to give. Because real morality, the kind that challenges rather than conforms, doesn't require you to disappear. It requires you to exist, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. You don't owe the world your silence. You don't owe it your burnout. You don't owe it your soul just to be called good. Because the moment you stop sacrificing yourself for approval is the moment you become dangerous. And you were never born to be safe. You were born to be real, to be whole, to be free. You've just never been told that was moral. They normalized sacrifice. But now you know the price, and you get to decide if it's worth paying again. You sense it now. There's more at stake than you were ever allowed to see. And just when you thought you understood the rules, what if the next step is to forget them entirely? Keep watching. Something deeper's waiting. Imagine if every time you asked why, someone handed you a symbol instead. A symbol that looked official, that felt profound, that came from a source you trusted. Maybe it was a cross, a flag, a brand logo, a mathematical equation, or a psychological term. It doesn't matter what the symbol is. What matters is that it replaced your question and you didn't even notice, because that's the trick. When people in power want you to stop thinking, they don't silence you directly. They distract you with meaning. Manufactured meaning. Symbolic meaning. You ask, why do we fight these wars? And someone raises a flag. You ask, why do I feel empty? And someone shows you a luxury brand. You ask, why are things unfair? And someone hands you a sacred text, or a complex ideology, or a corporate mission statement. In each case, the question doesn't get answered. It gets absorbed. Symbols are answers that don't answer. They feel like closure, but they are carefully designed dead ends, because real answers provoke action. Real answers challenge systems. Real answers threaten control. Symbols, on the other hand, preserve it. Symbols have power because they bypass your critical mind. They tap directly into emotion, identity, belonging. They give you something to wear, to chant, to believe in, something to feel instead of something to examine. And that's dangerous, because the moment a question is replaced with a symbol, it becomes sacred, off limits. You can't dissect a flag without being called unpatriotic. You can't question a religious icon without being called blasphemous. You can't critique a logo without threatening someone's sense of self. That's not coincidence. It's engineering. This isn't about symbols themselves being bad. It's about how they're used. Deployed, weaponized. Symbols become mental shortcuts, and shortcuts are useful when they help us survive. But they're devastating when they stop us from thinking. That's how people in power keep control, not just over institutions, but over thought itself. It starts with education. You're taught to memorize symbols instead of understand systems. You're rewarded for repeating answers, not questioning frameworks. Over time, you stop asking questions altogether. You start mistaking familiarity for understanding. Think about how quickly political parties are reduced to colors, how religions become icons, how entire ideologies get compressed into a single symbol and treated like a personality trait. Ask a complex question, and you'll get a bumper sticker. Why? Because complexity threatens authority. Symbols don't. And this substitution doesn't just happen externally, it happens inside you. You begin to brand your own identity with symbols. You call yourself a liberal, a conservative, a minimalist, a Christian, an entrepreneur. And once you adopt the symbol, you start to protect it, even when it contradicts reality, even when it limits your growth, because symbols give you identity, and identity is addictive. But here's the cost. Every time you protect a symbol, you abandon a question. You start defending images instead of confronting truth. You repeat slogans instead of exploring meaning. And slowly, your thinking becomes outsourced. Not to people, but to signs. To unchallenged representations of meaning that do your thinking for you. This is how control becomes invisible. Not through force, but through substitution. You're not told what to think. You're taught not to think. Because you're too busy guarding the symbol. Look around. Watch how often people argue over symbols instead of what those symbols represent. Watch how easily outrage is triggered by desecration, but not by deception. Watch how quickly we defend symbols we don't even understand. This isn't accidental, it's strategic. When questions are dangerous, symbols are safe. But nothing meaningful ever came from safety. The moment you replace a question with a symbol, you give up something vital, your agency, your curiosity, your ability to see clearly. So next time you're handed a symbol, don't hold it up like a shield. Hold it up like a mirror. Ask yourself, what question is this supposed to replace? And if the symbol makes you feel too proud to ask, too angry to think, or too certain to doubt, that's your warning sign. That's when you know someone doesn't want you to understand, they want you to believe. But belief without question isn't strength, it's surrender. So ask the question anyway, even if it makes you uncomfortable, especially if it makes you uncomfortable. Because nothing is more dangerous to control than a mind that keeps asking. You think you're safe behind symbols, but the truth is, you're just easier to control, and you're worth more than that. You were built to ask, not just to obey. You were built to think, not just to believe. Because the moment you stop asking is the moment someone else starts answering for you, and they will always answer with a symbol. So don't let them, because the next tactic is simpler. They don't just replace your questions, they replace your time, and that's when they keep you busy so you don't think. You wake up, check your phone, and the flood begins. Emails, notifications, reminders. Before your feet even touch the ground, your brain is already occupied. There's no space, no silence, no time to think. And that's not an accident. From the moment you're conscious, the world starts filling your attention. Not with meaning, but with noise. Tasks, content, obligations, and slowly, invisibly, your day is structured not to help you think, but to make sure you don't. Because if you had time to think, really think, what might you discover? You might notice the cracks in your reality, the dissatisfaction you've been ignoring, the quiet, nagging sense that something is off, that your life, your work, even your dreams might not be yours at all, that maybe you've been set on autopilot by a system that benefits from your distraction. Busyness is a defense against introspection, against awareness. The more you're doing, the less you're questioning. It feels productive, it feels responsible. But under the surface, it's just another form of sedation. To think about your calendar. It's full, isn't it? Meetings, errands, deadlines. But how much of it was chosen, really chosen, by you? And how much was inherited, assigned, expected? You're not just staying busy, you're being kept busy. Society glorifies hustle, praises productivity, worships multitasking. But why? Because busy people don't rebel, they don't organize, they don't introspect, they don't ask dangerous questions. A tired, distracted mind is easy to manage. A silent, contemplative one is a threat. This is the subtle genius of modern control. It doesn't require chains or force. It just needs to keep you occupied, and it starts early. Schools teach compliance through schedules. Bells dictate movement. Assignments fill every hour. Boredom is punished. Stillness is rare. You learn that value equals output, that rest is laziness, and that silence is suspicious. By adulthood, you've internalized it. You feel guilty when you're not doing something. Free time becomes something to fill. Leisure is monetized. Even hobbies must be productive. Everything, even relaxation, is scheduled, optimized, tracked. But ask yourself, when was the last time you sat alone in silence, without a screen, without a purpose, without a plan? It probably felt uncomfortable, like you were wasting time, like you were falling behind. But that discomfort, that's the gateway. That's where real thought begins. That's where you start to confront the truth that your life may not be fully yours. Busyness creates the illusion of progress. But what are you progressing toward? Whose goals are you working toward? Are they even your own? Corporations love your busyness. So do governments. So do advertisers. The more distracted you are, the less aware you are of how deeply you're being influenced. And it's not just about capitalism or politics. It's psychological. A busy mind avoids emotional pain. If you're always running, you never have to feel, never have to grieve, never have to reckon with the parts of yourself that are aching for attention. That's why stillness is so terrifying. In silence, the truth surfaces. Regrets, fears, disappointments, it all starts to rise, and we're trained to run from that, to suppress it with movement, with noise, with to-do lists. But here's the twist. That discomfort is the only path to clarity. The only way out is through. Until you stop moving, you can't see where you are. Until you sit in silence, you can't hear yourself. You can't question the life you've built, the roles you've accepted, the lies you've been living. You were not born to be a machine. You were not born to be efficient. You were born to be awake, aware, conscious. But the system can't afford that. So it keeps you busy. Constantly, endlessly, deliberately. The next time you feel overwhelmed, ask yourself who benefits from your exhaustion, who gains from your distraction, and what might happen if even for a moment you refuse to participate. What might you see in the silence? You've been tricked into thinking that time spent thinking is time wasted. But that's the most dangerous lie of all, because thought, real undistracted thought, is the beginning of freedom. And freedom isn't handed to you. You have to fight for it, with silence, with stillness, with the radical act of doing nothing, long enough to remember who you really are. You're not too busy to think. You've just been made to believe thinking isn't important, and nothing could be further from the truth. If they can keep you busy, they can keep you blind. But if you stop, even briefly, you might start to see everything they don't want you to notice. Everything starts there. You feel it now, don't you? The quiet underneath the noise, the pull to look deeper. Stay there. Because what comes next doesn't just ask for your attention, it asks for your identity. Have you ever wondered what makes identity so powerful? Not just personal identity, but the collective kind: race, religion, nationality, ideology. These aren't just labels, they're psychological weapons, and when wielded with precision, they can control not just individuals, but entire civilizations. You don't just have an identity, you are given one. From birth, the world wraps you in narratives. Some inherited, some imposed. You're told what to believe, who to admire, who to fear. The stories you hear about your people, your history, your enemies, they aren't just information, they're scripts. Scripts designed to shape how you think, what you value, and most critically, who you will follow. Now ask yourself, who benefits from these stories? The more emotionally invested you are in your identity, the easier it is to manipulate you. You defend it like it's your home. Threaten someone's ideology, and you don't just get debate, you get fury, because it's personal. The mind doesn't distinguish between attacking a belief and attacking the self, which is exactly why ideologies are engineered to be sacred, not questioned, defended at all costs. Look at history: tribalism, nationalism, religious wars, people murdering each other, not because of reason, but because of identity. Entire generations turned into soldiers, willing to die because their identity was framed as under attack, because loyalty was moralized, betrayal demonized, and complexity erased. But it doesn't stop with conflict. Identity also pacifies. When you're told you belong to something bigger, you don't question the system that defines it. You internalize your role. You follow the rules. You work, consume, obey, not because you're forced to, but because people like you are supposed to. You become loyal, not just to a group, but to the power structure behind it. And here's where the weaponization sharpens. Leaders, whether political, religious, or corporate, use identity as leverage. They manufacture division, exaggerate threats, and then present themselves as protectors. Without us, they say, your identity will be destroyed. And just like that, fear overrides reason. Complexity dissolves into us versus them. Think of the slogans: real Americans, true believers, patriots. These aren't just phrases, they're purity tests. They draw lines. And once you're inside, the system controls you with both pride and fear. You fear being cast out, being labeled a traitor, being alone. The truth is, identity makes people predictable. Once you know what someone identifies with, you can map their beliefs, anticipate their behavior, and manipulate their emotions. Identity shortcuts critical thinking. It replaces what's right with what would someone like me do. This is why movements that seek genuine change often get sabotaged, not by brute force, but by fragmentation. Divide them by race, by class, by ideology, by strategy. Feed each subgroup a unique identity. Make them distrust one another. Suddenly, they stop fighting the system and start fighting each other. It's genius. It's devastating. And the scariest part, it works best when you don't even realize it's happening. You're convinced you're thinking for yourself, that your values are your own. But you don't see the architecture behind them. The slow drip of narratives designed to shape not what you believe, but who you believe you are. Because if they can control that, they don't need to control anything else. So what do? The answer isn't to reject identity completely. It's to become aware of it. To recognize when your group is being used to control your mind. To ask, who benefits from me seeing them as the enemy? Who gains from my loyalty? What parts of my identity have I chosen? And what parts were chosen for me? Because once you start asking those questions, the weapon dulls, the spell breaks, and the control begins to crack. You are not your labels. You are not your programming. You are not your side in someone else's war. You're something far more dangerous than that. You're awake. They'll make sure you argue about it. Loudly, passionately, endlessly. Just so long as you never figure out who wrote the script in the first place. Let's say you walk into a room filled with people arguing. Loud voices, clashing opinions, rising tensions. You assume something important is being debated. But stay a while, and you notice something strange. No one actually wants to solve anything. They just want to win. They want to be right. And when they finally burn out, they leave the room no wiser, no closer, no stronger, just drained. That's not dysfunction. That's design. Because one of the most effective ways to stop people from organizing is to keep them arguing. When people argue, they feel active, alive, important. Their opinions matter. Their voice is heard. But that illusion is the trap. Argument gives the illusion of engagement while preventing any real action. You exhaust your energy on battles that lead nowhere, while the actual systems of control remain untouched. You were never taught how to collaborate. You were taught how to debate. Conflict, when properly used, isn't about truth. It's about division. Divide a population into smaller groups, pit them against each other, and they'll do the work of control for you. They'll monitor each other, cancel each other, humiliate each other. All while those in power remain untouched, unbothered, and out of reach. It's like a chess game where the pawns start fighting each other while the king watches from a distance, perfectly safe. And here's the most cunning part. The arguments don't even have to be fake, they just have to be endless. Race, gender, identity, language, taste, ideology, religion, real issues, real feelings. But the system doesn't care about the content. It only cares about the outcome, disunity. Because as long as you're arguing with your neighbor, you're not questioning your boss. As long as you're tearing down strangers online, you're not building anything in real life. Anger feels powerful, but unchanneled anger is just noise. It makes you feel like you're fighting oppression while staying exactly where the system wants you. Busy, isolated, and harmless. And when people do try to organize, that's when the arguments intensify. Disagreements are amplified. Divisions exaggerated. Subgroups splinter. Movements collapse under the weight of internal purity tests. You're not radical enough. You're too radical. You're problematic. You're privileged. Until everyone is too offended, too afraid, or too demoralized to move forward together. That's not coincidence. That's sabotage. Social media supercharges this process. It turns every disagreement into performance. You're not just expressing an opinion, you're building a brand. Each argument becomes an opportunity to signal allegiance, to harvest likes, to build a following. But behind all the noise, nothing changes. No power shifts, no systems crumble, just dopamine hits, tribal war cries, and endless digital skirmishes that solve nothing and cost everything. You're trained to believe your voice is your power, but isolated voices don't change systems. Organized voices do, coordinated voices, relentless voices. But that kind of unity, it requires humility, compromise, listening, all things that argument erodes. Ask yourself, when was the last time an argument made you rethink your position? When was the last time you saw a public debate end in mutual understanding? Probably never, because that's not the point anymore. The point is to destroy, not persuade, to dominate, not organize. And while we scream at each other, someone else writes the laws, signs the checks, buys the land, wins the contracts. The power doesn't vanish, it just flows silently to those who never had to enter the room. The loudest voices become weapons, but the quiet strategists win the war. Understand this: disunity is a strategy, confusion is a strategy, argument, when it replaces action, is control. And the most dangerous part is it feels like resistance. It feels like progress, but it's not. Because real change isn't loud. It's organized, it's disciplined, it's strategic. It doesn't happen in comment sections or quote tweets. It happens in planning meetings, in coalitions, in shared goals and sustained pressure. And those who benefit from your disunity, they hope you never realize that, because the moment you stop arguing and start organizing, you become dangerous. And they've built entire systems to make sure that never happens. You can scream into the void for the rest of your life, or you can step away from the noise, link arms with others, and build something stronger than the divisions they gave you. That's the real threat. That's what they fear most. Because when the arguing ends, the organizing begins, and that's when power starts to shift. You've already lost too much time screaming into silence. Maybe it's time to start building. You've seen the chaos. You've felt the exhaustion. Now imagine what they'll give you next. Something soothing, empowering, confidence boosting. But take a closer look. What if the confidence they hand you is just another cage? Keep listening. It's not what it seems. Imagine being told you're free. Free to think, free to speak, free to act. But then imagine every part of your environment subtly, repeatedly telling you how exceptional you are while quietly tightening the leash. That's the paradox at the heart of modern control. Inflate confidence while reducing freedom. You're praised for your uniqueness, encouraged to express yourself, and reminded constantly that your voice matters. But this praise comes with an invisible cost. It gives you just enough ego to feel autonomous, while the real mechanisms of power shrink the space in which you can actually move. Think of the workplace. You're celebrated for your creativity, your initiative, your leadership potential. But are you really free? Every "you've got this" email is followed by a deadline. Every innovation you propose is filtered through 10 layers of approval. You're given the illusion of empowerment, but not the substance. You're encouraged to dream big, just not beyond the company handbook. Confidence becomes the leash. The more you're told you're exceptional, the more you feel personally invested in the system that praises you. You stop questioning whether the system itself is flawed, because it made you feel special. And who wants to dismantle a machine that finally made them feel seen? This isn't accidental. It's psychological design. Inflate the ego so that rebellion feels like ingratitude. Make people believe their potential is being realized, so they never notice how narrow the corridor really is. It happens in education too. Children are told they're brilliant, destined for greatness, but their creativity is graded. Their curiosity is timed. They're taught to express themselves, so long as that expression fits inside standardized tests. They graduate confident, but obedient, ambitious, but rule-following, trained to believe in themselves, yet afraid to color outside the lines. Confidence without freedom is cosmetic. It's the smile painted on the puppet's face. This tactic even seeps into our social lives. Platforms tell you your voice matters. Your post is important. Your opinion essential. Your selfie empowering. But the algorithms determine who sees it. The platform decides what spreads. You're fed dopamine for speaking out. But the boundaries of speech are controlled, manipulated, shaped. You're not being silenced, you're being directed, and you don't even realize it's happening. Because you feel confident, and confidence is comforting. It tells you you're in control, even when you're not. Governments do it too. Citizens are encouraged to vote, to participate, to believe in democracy. But how much power do you really hold? The candidates are pre-selected. The choices curated. The machinery of governance runs on money and influence far beyond your reach. Yet you're told your voice matters. You're given symbolic power to keep you from asking where the real power went. This is the genius of control through praise. Make people feel strong, important, and respected, so they'll never notice they're being managed. And if someone does push back, it's your sit-through. They're dismissed, not with punishment, but with flattery. You're too smart to think like that. You're better than this kind of cynicism. It's not coercion, it's emotional bribery. But here's the most chilling part. Over time, you internalize it. You become your own warden. You silence your doubts. You narrow your dreams. You begin to conflate praise with progress, validation with liberty. And before you know it, you're stuck, smiling, applauded, and perfectly still. The prison has no bars, only compliments. And the guards. They're disguised as mentors, managers, influencers, and leaders, always applauding, always encouraging, always tightening. You were never supposed to be truly free. You were supposed to feel free. Because confidence keeps you from noticing the cage. But if you start to look closely, really closely, you might see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when everything changes. That's when you stop smiling, just because they told you you're brilliant. Because maybe you are. But brilliance inside a cage is still captivity. You just didn't know how comfortable the chains could feel. You're finally starting to see it. And the next step, that will test you more than you expect. You've felt what happens when you're praised. Now it's time to feel what happens when you stay quiet. Victim no, maybe gremo, maybe. Imagine you're in a room full of people. Everyone's laughing, clapping, echoing the same words. Their faces light up when someone says something agreeable. But when you speak carefully, thoughtfully, maybe even critically, there's a pause, an awkward silence. No applause, no laughter, just quiet. You feel it in your stomach, that sinking weight of social exclusion. That's not accidental. That's a system at work. Praise noise. Punish silence. This is how control begins, not with force, but with feedback, with applause for compliance, with silence for dissent. Social conditioning isn't built on laws, it's built on approval. The loudest voice in the room doesn't need to be right, it just needs to be celebrated. Because when everyone claps, your brain hears safety, belonging, validation. And when they don't, your brain hears threat, rejection, danger. This is behavioral psychology, 101. Operant conditioning. Reward behavior you want. Ignore or punish what you don't. But when it's applied to ideas instead of actions, it becomes something darker. A thought prison made of social cues. Watch a child in class raise their hand and say something bold. If the class cheers, they'll do it again. If the class laughs at them, they shrink. Maybe they never speak up again. Not because the idea was wrong, but because the silence told them it wasn't safe. And it never really stops. Adults just get better at hiding it. At work, someone questions the group's direction. No response, not even eye contact. But when someone parrots a popular view, praise, nods, maybe even a raise, over time this sculpts minds, not toward truth, but toward conformity. Noise becomes virtue, silence becomes vice. Even online, this rule governs everything. Tweets, videos, opinions. Engagement equals reward. Silence equals erasure. If your post doesn't go viral, the algorithm buries it. If your comment isn't liked, it disappears into the void. The system teaches you, be louder, safer, more agreeable, and if you're too honest, too nuanced, you get ignored, or worse, attacked. So what do people do? They adapt. They learn to chase noise, to say what gets applause, to avoid saying what might trigger silence. They stop thinking aloud. They start performing. That's the real function of the digital stage. It rewards performance, not introspection. But here's the dangerous part. When noise is praise and silence is punishment, the truth gets quieter. Not because it's less true, but because it's less rewarded. And eventually, people stop speaking truths entirely. Not because they're cowards, but because they've been trained, gently, constantly, not to. This is why some of the most important ideas feel lonely. Why real insight often emerges from solitude. Not because the crowd is evil, but because the crowd is conditioned to reward safety, to punish discomfort. And that makes silence not just absence, but resistance. You see, there's a twist. If you refuse to seek noise, if you speak despite the silence, you're dangerous to systems. Because systems depend on predictability, applause patterns, feedback loops. They thrive when you adapt. They panic when you don't. So the next time you say something and the room goes quiet, remember this: the silence isn't always a failure. Sometimes it's a sign you said something real. And praise, that can be just as much a leash as a gift. Ask yourself, are you being honest or just rewarded? Are you being brave or just popular? Because in a world that trains you to fear silence, choosing it can be the loudest thing you ever do. You're not here to echo, you're here to disrupt. And the only way to know you're truly thinking for yourself is to be willing to hear nothing back. Sometimes the truest voice is the one the crowd refuses to answer. But maybe that's when it matters most. Maybe the only thing scarier than silence is learning to trust it. If that made your chest tighten a little, hold on to it, because what comes next asks you to turn that discomfort into something even more powerful. Imagine you're 6 years old, clutching a crumpled drawing in trembling hands. You show it to your parent, glowing with pride. But instead of a smile, they frown. Maybe they laugh, maybe they don't say anything at all. Either way, something inside you twists. You don't know what to call it yet, but it's shame. And in that moment you decide next time you won't show them anything. Shame from the beginning doesn't just teach you what not to do, it teaches you who not to be. We're taught to fear shame. Hide from it. Bury it under layers of performance, pretense, or perfection. But what if that instinct to run from shame is the very thing keeping you trapped? Shame is powerful, yes, but not because it's evil. It's powerful because it reveals. It reveals what you care about, what you're afraid of. What you believe makes you unworthy of love, respect, or acceptance. That's why it hurts so much. Not because it's a lie, but because it carries just enough truth to sting. Most people never interrogate their shame. They just react. Avoid, obey, and that's where control begins. Society doesn't have to punish you for stepping out of line if it can teach you to punish yourself. If it can make you flinch at your own reflection. That's the genius of shame. Once internalized, it does the work of your oppressors for them. Think about how shame is used to shape your behavior. You're shamed for being too loud, too quiet, too ambitious, too passive, too sexual, too prudish, too emotional, too cold. You're always too something, always needing correction, control. But here's the shift. Here's the rebellion. What if you stop running from shame and start listening to it, not believing it? Listening, because shame, when you dare to sit with it, is a map. It points toward the edges of your conditioning. It shows you where society's expectations have fused with your self-worth. It shows you where you've been told you're wrong, not because you are, but because your power makes others uncomfortable. Feel ashamed of being assertive. That might be where you were taught to be small. Ashamed of asking for help. That might be where you were taught that need is weakness. Ashamed of your body. That might be where someone else's profit depended on your insecurity. When you follow shame to its roots, you often find control. And that's where everything changes. Because now, you can turn shame into a compass. Not something that defines your limits, but something that reveals where they were artificially drawn. Shame becomes a signal, not of your brokenness, but of your boundaries. Not a command to retreat, but a prompt to question. Who told me this was wrong? Who benefits from me believing that? And more importantly, do I agree? That question, that tiny defiant moment of reflection, is where autonomy begins. Turning shame into a compass doesn't mean embracing shamelessness. It means separating what is truly harmful from what is merely uncomfortable. It means reclaiming your values from the rubble of societal programming. It means letting shame guide you not toward compliance, but toward clarity. When you do this, shame stops being a prison and starts becoming a doorway. A portal into parts of yourself you were told to reject. Your anger, your desire, your creativity, your courage. The parts of you that feel dangerous are often the parts most worth exploring. Because control thrives on self-repression. It needs you to stay small, obedient, and uncertain. It needs you to confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. But when shame becomes your compass, you're no longer easy to manipulate. You no longer need to be liked, approved, or forgiven to know you're right. You become harder to shame, harder to control. And that's exactly why most systems of power fear people who are self-aware. Not because they're loud, but because they're free. So the next time you feel that familiar flush of shame, pause, don't look away, don't silence it, follow it. It might just be the most honest thing you feel all day. The truth you're avoiding is the truth you most need to hear, and the shame you carry. It might not be a curse, it might be your compass home. You've felt it before, swallowing your words, shrinking your thoughts, biting your tongue so hard it bleeds. But what if the next act of so-called maturity is the most dangerous kind of obedience you've ever been taught? You've heard it your whole life, haven't you? Speak when spoken to. Pick your battles. Be the bigger person. It sounds like wisdom, like emotional intelligence, like maturity. But what if it isn't? What if the behavior we call maturity is often just self-censorship in disguise, rewarded, reinforced, and recoded as virtue? Let's break it open. Self-censorship isn't just staying silent, it's self-editing, pre-filtering. It's the internal pause before you speak, the tightening in your throat when the truth rises, but you swallow it instead. It's not that you can't speak, it's that you've learned not to. Because every time you do speak up and it rocks the boat, you get punished. Socially, professionally, sometimes even legally. So you learn, you adapt, and over time, you believe that silence is strength. But here's the twist. Society doesn't just demand your silence, it calls it growth. And then it rewards you for complying. Ever notice how the most respected people in the room are often the quietest? The most admirable employees are the ones who never complain. The most mature partners are the ones who never escalate, never confront, never disrupt. They're not praised for being right, they're praised for being agreeable. And that's the trick. We've created a culture where repression is seen as evolution, where not reacting, not expressing, not confronting, is seen as emotional development, as though the highest form of enlightenment is to quietly absorb every injustice without pushing back. But that isn't maturity, that's programming, and the system knows it. In schools, children who speak their minds are labeled disruptive. In workplaces, those who challenge norms are deemed unprofessional. In relationships, those who express needs are called needy. And in each case, self-suppression becomes the survival tactic. Eventually, the person who once had sharp thoughts and passionate convictions learns to keep their fire buried. Not because it went out, but because it's dangerous to let it burn where anyone can see it. So we lie to ourselves. We call it grace, patience, wisdom. But the truth, we've just become easier to manage, because people who censor themselves are predictable, containable, harmless. They won't start revolutions. They won't upset hierarchies. They won't even demand accountability. They'll just smile politely while silently screaming. And the rewards keep coming. You get invited to more rooms, promoted to safer positions, praised for being level-headed, respected for your restraint. But what you're really being applauded for is your obedience. The more silent you are, the more valuable you become to the system. Because outspoken people threaten order, but self-censoring people, they uphold it without even being asked. And it gets worse. Because once you believe your silence is maturity, you start to look down on those who still speak out. You call them immature, angry, unhinged. You become a foot soldier for the very system that broke you, enforcing the same suppression you once resented. That's how the cycle continues. We don't need authoritarian regimes to silence dissent. We just need enough people who mistake compliance for character. And the deeper you go, the more you start to confuse authenticity with recklessness. As if speaking your truth is a form of self-sabotage. As if honesty is childish and restraint is holy. But ask yourself, what kind of maturity asks you to kill your own voice? What kind of wisdom demands your silence? There's nothing noble about abandoning your truth. There's nothing mature about pretending you're okay with things that are eating you alive. And there's no virtue in performing serenity while rotting inside. You don't owe anyone your silence. Because real maturity isn't silence. It's discernment. It's knowing when to speak, how to speak, and still choosing to speak when the moment demands it. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. So the next time you're praised for holding your tongue, ask yourself, was that growth or was that surrender? And who really benefited from your silence? Maybe maturity isn't what we thought it was. Maybe it's not about taming your voice, but learning how to wield it, carefully, powerfully, honestly. Because the moment you begin to believe that silence is strength, you've already started losing yourself. They don't need to take your voice. They just need you to believe you're better off not using it. But what happens when that voice finally cracks through the surface? What happens when the people who've been silent the longest start to speak? You're about to find out. Sometimes the thing you're most afraid of isn't danger, it's clarity. And if that fear gets pointed in the wrong direction, it'll destroy you before you even realize it. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a fire alarm. Your heart races, your breath quickens, you grab what you can and run. No hesitation, no deep thought, just raw instinct. But what if the fire wasn't real? What if it was triggered on purpose, just to see how you'd behave? To test how easily you can be steered. That's how fear works when it's redirected. Not as a response to real threats, but as a tool to guide your decisions, your emotions, your beliefs. Not away from danger, but toward obedience. We like to think fear sharpens us, makes us alert, helps us survive. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Fear makes you stupid. It narrows your focus, hijacks your reason, and hands over the reins of your mind to anyone holding the right trigger. Fear isn't just a reaction, it's a weapon. And someone right now is pointing it at the wrong target on purpose. Think about the headlines you scroll through, the ones that scream, shout, terrify. Crime is up, immigrants are invading, your job is next, your rights are under attack. You're being replaced. The country is falling apart. Panic sells, outrage spreads, and fear sticks. It roots itself deep because fear is primal. Once it's in, it's hard to dig out. But rarely do we stop to ask, who benefits from this fear? Because while you're busy watching the door, terrified of the intruder, someone else is sneaking in through the window. Politicians know this well. Redirected fear is their favorite tactic. Want support for a war? Manufacture an external enemy. Want to pass surveillance laws? Invent a shadowy threat. Want to win an election? Point to someone different than you, different color, accent, background, and whisper, they're taking what's yours. It doesn't matter if it's true. It only matters that it feels true. Fear makes sure of that. Even corporations do it. Scare you about aging, and they can sell you cream. Scare you about germs, and they can sell you sanitizer. Scare you about losing status, and they can sell you anything. Cars, clothes, tech, beauty. The product isn't the solution. The product is the distraction. A shiny, expensive way to feel safe without ever asking if the fear was real in the first place. But here's the darker truth. The more often fear is redirected, the less you trust yourself. You start to believe the threats they feed you more than the instincts you once had. You look outside for danger, instead of within. You start chasing shadows while ignoring the monster holding the flashlight. And that's the goal, not just to make you afraid, but to make you unsure of where to point your fear. They don't need you to think they're right. They just need you to be afraid of something else. So the economy collapses, and they tell you it's the fault of the poor. Billionaires dodge taxes, and they tell you to blame the immigrant. The planet warms, and they tell you it's your plastic straw, not corporate pollution. You're overworked, underpaid, drowning in stress, and they whisper, it's your neighbor's fault, not the system that profits from your exhaustion. You lash out, just like they hoped. But at the wrong enemy, that's how control works. Because when fear is pointed at the right target, corruption, inequality, systemic abuse, it becomes power. It fuels action. It brings people together. But when fear is redirected, pointed at scapegoats, distractions, illusions, it fractures. It turns neighbor against neighbor, victim against victim, the oppressed against each other, while the powerful watch, sip wine and laugh. And the worst part, you don't even know it's happening. Because fear makes you feel like you're in control, like you're defending something important. When really, you're guarding the gates of your own cage, keeping yourself inside. So ask yourself, what are you afraid of, and who told you to be? Because until you answer that honestly, you'll keep firing arrows at phantoms while the real enemy reloads, smirking, untouched. Stay afraid long enough, and you'll forget what freedom even feels like. You'll beg for chains that look like safety. You'll mistake control for protection. And you'll defend the people who've been lying to you all along. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Because the moment you stop reacting and start questioning, the spell breaks. And suddenly, the threats feel smaller, the lies feel obvious, and the fear finally points where it always should have. Not at the stranger beside you, but at the system above you. If you're ready to see who benefits when your fear is misplaced, then you're finally ready for what comes next. You've seen how fear blinds you. But what if belief does something even more dangerous, makes you feel seen, accepted, even loved, while burying the truth beneath a smile? Keep watching. It's about to get personal. Imagine walking into a room where everyone is already laughing. They all know the joke, the inside story, the unspoken rules. You don't. You're on the outside, alien, exposed. Now imagine someone hands you a belief, not proof, not truth, just belief. They say, "Here, hold this. It means you belong." Suddenly, you're not alone anymore. That's the power of belief, not as a conclusion, but as an entry ticket. We rarely adopt beliefs because they're logically airtight. We adopt them because they come bundled with identity, inclusion, and emotional safety. Belief becomes a shortcut to belonging. Think about religion, politics, conspiracies. They all offer more than just ideas. They offer us a place to be part of something, a tribe, a shared enemy, a common language. You're not just agreeing with a viewpoint, you're earning a seat at the table. And once you're seated, everything changes. Doubt feels like betrayal. Questions sound like heresy. Your grip on the belief tightens, not because the evidence grows stronger, but because your emotional investment deepens. You believe because not believing would mean exile. This is why belief is such a potent control mechanism. It doesn't need to be true. It just needs to feel like home. And home is hard to leave. Ever wonder why cults work so well? It's not mind control. It's emotional engineering. They isolate you, then offer connection. They disorient you, then offer clarity. They break down your sense of self. then rebuild it using their blueprint. And at the center of it all is belief. A belief that makes the world feel safe, structured, and meaningful again. But here's the twist. This isn't just about extreme cases. It happens everywhere. Social media thrives on it. Like a belief buffet, it offers endless identities to try on. You join a movement, repost a slogan, follow the right accounts, and suddenly you feel seen. Not because you discovered truth, but because someone finally nodded back at you. Even consumer brands do this. They sell more than products. They sell belief systems. Buy this, and you're not just wearing a shoe. You're becoming part of a lifestyle, a tribe, a belonging club, and politics. It's no longer about policy. It's about allegiance, about wearing the right colors, repeating the right mantras. You're not voting for ideas. You're pledging loyalty to a side, a symbol, a shared grievance. Because belonging isn't rational. It's tribal. It's ancient. We are wired to seek it, crave it, protect it. And those who understand this, marketers, politicians, influencers, don't sell arguments. They sell belief, wrapped in identity, glued together by emotion. Here's the disturbing part. The less secure someone feels, the more susceptible they become. Loneliness, fear, uncertainty. They don't just make people vulnerable, they make people desperate for belonging. So what's the quickest fix? Adopt a belief that says you're not alone and you won't be. But at what cost? Because when belonging is tied to belief, questioning becomes dangerous. Not to the belief itself, but to your place within the group. To challenge the idea is to risk the tribe. To entertain doubt is to threaten exile. And so, you stay, you agree, you repeat. Not because it makes sense, but because it makes you safe. That's the real danger. Not that false beliefs exist, but that they're glued to the deepest human need, connection. You think you're choosing an idea, but really, you're choosing not to be alone. And maybe, without realizing it, you're selling belief too, recommending it like a product. Here, hold this. It means you matter. It means you're one of us. But the moment belief becomes a shortcut to belonging, truth becomes secondary. Loyalty takes over, and curiosity, the impulse to ask, to probe, to wonder, gets quietly buried under the pressure to conform. That's not how belief is supposed to work. It's supposed to follow the evidence, not precede it. It's supposed to help us think, not shield us from thinking. So ask yourself, are your beliefs really yours, or were they handed to you in exchange for acceptance? Do they help you see the world clearly, or just keep you comfortably surrounded? Because sometimes the deepest manipulations don't happen through fear or force. Through the soft promise, you belong here, if you just believe. And sometimes that promise is all it takes to give up everything else. You didn't even notice it happening, did you? Because it felt good. It felt like home. But the truth, belonging built on belief, isn't belonging. It's dependence. And once you see that, you can finally begin to choose what to believe and who to become. Stay with this, because if belief can be used to bind you, what happens when it's used to blind you? You're about to find out. Imagine being stranded in a desert. No map, no water, just heat, dust, and the promise of survival. You wander, blistered and burned, scraping by with whatever scraps you can find. Then one day, someone hands you a glass of lukewarm water, and you thank them like they've saved your life. That's the trick. Make survival feel like winning. If people are desperate enough, even the bare minimum feels like a blessing. And when you mistake survival for success, you stop asking for more. You stop dreaming. You stop resisting. This is one of the oldest mind games in the book. Turn the struggle into a privilege. Think about your job. You're paid just enough to keep going, not enough to get ahead. You're praised for grinding, for being a team player, for pushing through burnout. The stress becomes a badge of honor. The exhaustion is proof you're doing it right. You're told to be grateful, to smile through it, to believe you're lucky just to have a paycheck, and you do. Not because you're naive, but because you've been trained to see endurance as achievement. You've been taught to equate pain with purpose. It starts early. Schools reward obedience and punish restlessness. You're told to sit still, follow rules, earn gold stars. Not because it builds character, but because it conditions you to perform, regardless of whether you're thriving. You learn to tolerate discomfort, to wear struggle like armor. And when that conditioning follows you into adulthood, the system wins. Because now you're not just surviving, you're defending your survival. You convince yourself that the late nights, the anxiety, the lack of control are signs you're doing something meaningful. You've internalized the belief that struggle itself is virtuous, that if you're suffering, you must be doing something right. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You're not thriving, you're coping. Then you've been told to call it success. This isn't just psychological, it's systemic. Governments do it. Corporations do it. Entire economic models are built on keeping people just barely afloat, just comfortable enough to keep quiet, just desperate enough not to revolt. Benefits are dangled like rewards, not rights. Wages are kept low, then raised slightly, so the increase feels generous, when in reality, it's just adjusting the temperature of the water in your boiling pot. Even your language changes. You start saying things like, "At least I have a job. It could be worse. I'm lucky to be here." You shrink your standards until survival itself feels like a dream. Your gratitude becomes a leash. You're surviving, and you're convinced you're winning. Meanwhile, those in power celebrate your resilience. They post about mental toughness, resilience culture, earning your stripes. But resilience isn't supposed to be a lifestyle. It's supposed to be temporary, a bridge, not a home. When survival is mistaken for success, you stop questioning the rules of the game. You stop asking why basic needs are so hard to meet. Why rest feels like rebellion. Why joy feels like laziness. You tell yourself others have it worse, that you shouldn't complain, that this is just how life is. But what you're really doing is normalizing struggle. And once you normalize it, you defend it. You defend the job that burns you out. You defend the rent that eats your income. You defend the boss who treats you like you're replaceable. Because to question it would mean admitting you're not actually winning. That the game is rigged. That your so-called success is someone else's manipulation. That realization hurts. But it's the first step toward reclaiming your standards. Because here's the secret they don't want you to know. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to want rest without guilt. Comfort without compromise. Joy without justification. Survival is not the finish line. It's the starting point. Stop clapping for the crumbs. Start demanding the feast. You don't exist just to endure. You exist to live. Fully, freely, and without apology. If that sounds radical, it's only because you've been taught to settle. But settling isn't noble. It's strategic compliance. It keeps you tired, distracted, and grateful for whatever scraps you're given. Don't let them redefine victory for you. You've been surviving. Now it's time to unlearn the applause you've given to pain. What comes next isn't just safer, it's stronger. You think that was uncomfortable. Wait until you realize the next illusion they've sold you. That control is love, that safety is obedience. You're about to see how protection can be the most seductive form of power. Don't look away. Have you ever noticed how protection always comes with a price? You're told it's for your safety, for your peace of mind, for the greater good. But beneath the soft language of protection lies something much darker: control. Not through violence or threats, but through comfort, dependency, and fear. Think of airport security. Every shoe removed, every bag scanned, every intrusive pat-down justified by the word safety. You don't question it, because fear has already done its job. You comply not because you trust, but because you've been trained to equate submission with survival. That's not protection. That's programming. Now zoom out. Look at governments. Laws are passed in the name of public security. Surveillance systems are sold as safeguards. But who watches the watchers? The justification is always the same. We're doing this to protect you. And yet, somehow, the more protection you're offered, the less freedom you seem to have. And here's the catch: most people welcome it, because protection feels good. It soothes. It makes chaos feel manageable. You're told to be grateful, to feel lucky that someone else is watching out for you. But the moment you surrender your autonomy in exchange for protection, you've made a trade you can never fully reverse. What starts as protection becomes a leash, soft at first, then tighter. This manipulation isn't always top-down either. It happens in families, in relationships, in friendships. A parent who protects their child from failure ends up smothering their independence. A partner who insists on protecting you from stress may quietly be making your decisions for you. The more someone shields you, the more they quietly decide what you're allowed to experience. And it doesn't feel like coercion, because it's cloaked in love, duty, concern. The word protect is an emotional decoy. It bypasses logic and hijacks your instincts. You're more likely to accept limits when they're framed as loving safeguards. But let's be honest, how much of that protection is really about you? And how much of it is about keeping you manageable, contained, predictable? Even at work, this shows up. Think of company policies that claim to protect your mental health, while simultaneously banning open conversations about burnout. Think of digital filters that protect users from harm, while quietly deciding what truths are too dangerous for you to see. Censorship wrapped in bubble wrap. This is why the disguise works so well. Because no one questions protection. You don't want to seem reckless, ungrateful, unwise. So you accept the curfews, the restrictions, the monitoring, all of it, until you forget where the line was between care and control. The manipulation deepens when you begin to self-police. You tell yourself not to say too much, not to ask the wrong questions, not to rock the boat. You start doing their job for them. That's when control becomes permanent. When it no longer needs an enforcer, you become the prison and the guard. And the worst part, you still believe you're free, because the bars look like policies. The handcuffs feel like hugs, and the chains sound like concern. So the next time someone tells you they're protecting you, pause. Ask yourself, are they making you safer or smaller? Are they shielding you or shaping you? Are you being guarded or guided into submission? Protection that requires obedience isn't protection. It's domestication. And once you understand that, you begin to see it everywhere, in the news, in relationships, in your own habits. It's the soft-spoken language of captivity, spoken with a smile, signed with a pat on the head. But now you know. Now you can start asking questions they never wanted you to ask. You don't need to be caged to be controlled. Sometimes, all it takes is being convinced that the cage was built for your own good. You're told to be grateful for the walls, because they keep the monsters out. But what if the real monster was the one who built the walls in the first place? Stay here for a moment longer, because what's coming next isn't just about being controlled. It's about how they make you forget you were ever free. Have you ever noticed how early it starts? You're a child, maybe 5, maybe 7, and someone asks, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Not "Who are you?" Not "What do you care about?" But what role you'll play. Teacher, doctor, athlete, astronaut. The world isn't interested in your voice, it's interested in your function, because the easiest way to control a person is to make them mistake identity for utility. You grow up internalizing it. School teaches you more about punctuality than curiosity, more about obedience than originality. Tests don't measure your thoughts, they measure your ability to repeat what's been handed to you. Every year, you're narrowed down, sorted into lanes, trained to perform. By the time you enter adulthood, your self-worth is already entangled with your ability to fulfill a predefined role. Parent, citizen. And every one of those roles comes with a script, a set of behaviors you're expected to follow, expectations you're not allowed to question. But here's the quiet trick. The more you play a role, the more your true self fades. At first, you're just pretending, smiling through the meeting, nodding at the lie, dressing how you're told. But over time, pretending becomes being. You start confusing your mask for your face. You stop asking yourself what you really think or feel, because the role has become more comfortable than the truth. You become a character in someone else's play, and you start to forget that you ever wrote your own lines. This isn't accidental. Systems thrive when people forget who they are. When the teacher forgets their curiosity. When the parent forgets their dreams. When the worker forgets their boundaries. When the citizen forgets their power. Because someone with a voice is unpredictable. They ask questions. They make demands. They change things. But someone with a role, they stay in their lane. Look around. Corporations reward you for sticking to your job description, not challenging it. Governments prefer obedient citizens to critical thinkers. Social institutions elevate those who fit in, not those who stand out. Even your friends and family often unconsciously reinforce the mask. You've changed becomes an accusation, not a compliment. The pressure to remain consistent, familiar, easy to categorize, it's relentless. And when you do try to speak up, when you dare to express something raw, authentic, unscripted, you're met with discomfort, confusion, even hostility, because your truth threatens the illusion everyone's agreed to live in. So you learn to suppress it, to keep the peace, to survive. But survival isn't the same as living. And here's the terrifying part. Over time, your voice doesn't just get quieter, it gets foreign. You try to access it, and it doesn't respond. You look in the mirror and see someone you recognize, but don't remember building. Your laughter sounds unfamiliar. Your opinions feel recycled. You say things you don't quite believe, and you stop noticing when you do. This is the cost of roleplay without pause. It's not performance, it's erasure. Because roles don't just shape behavior, they rewire belief. If you play the obedient employee long enough, you stop questioning the work. If you play the good partner long enough, you stop acknowledging resentment. If you play the loyal citizen long enough, you stop seeing injustice. And the scariest part, you'll be praised for it. People will call you successful, reliable, stable. They'll admire your composure, your consistency, your sacrifice. They'll celebrate the role, even as it buries the voice that once defined you. And maybe one day you'll wake up and feel a quiet emptiness. A longing you can't name. You'll look at your life, your job, your relationships, your routines, and realize you followed every rule, wore every costume, played every part. But you forgot who you were underneath it all, and you'll wonder when you stop choosing. But if you listen closely, there's still something beneath the surface. A whisper, a breath, a question. What would happen if I stopped performing? It's not too late to answer, but you'll have to give up the applause, the predictability, the comfort. You'll have to reclaim the voice you buried to fit the part. Because the most dangerous roles aren't forced, they're chosen. And the most powerful rebellion is remembering you have a choice. You were never born to play a part. You were born to speak. And the world may not like what you have to say, but it was never supposed to. You're not here to keep the peace. You're here to break the spell. You're here to remember. And once you do, there's no going back. You can feel it now, can't you? The urge to question, to unmask, to speak again. But be careful, because the moment you find your voice, they'll call it dangerous. They always do, especially when it dares to ask what comes next. What happens when a child asks too many questions? Not the cute ones, not "Why is the sky blue?" or "How do birds fly?" No questions that make adults uncomfortable. Why do we go to church if we don't believe? Why does my teacher say things you say aren't true? Why are the rules different for them? Watch what happens next. You'll see a flicker of discomfort, then irritation, then something worse, correction disguised as care, a scolding masked as love. The child is told they're being difficult, disrespectful, disruptive. That moment isn't just about behavior. It's a rehearsal for obedience, because in systems built on control, curiosity is dangerous. It's the first crack in the wall. Curiosity questions assumptions. It asks for proof. It refuses to accept because I said so as an answer. And that's exactly why it must be punished. Not overtly, not with violence, but with silence, shame, and subtle alienation. Ask too many questions, and suddenly you're the problem, not the system, not the rules, you. This isn't accidental, it's strategic. Societies that depend on conformity can't afford widespread curiosity. They tolerate just enough to appear open, but only within safe boundaries. The moment your curiosity threatens to destabilize the narrative, it's recast as rebellion. Think about school. The entire structure is built on rewards and punishments, but not for thinking, only for agreeing. Memorize the correct answer, repeat it at the right time, and you're praised. But ask, why is that true? Or who decided this was right? And the tone shifts. Suddenly, you're being defiant. You're interrupting. You're challenging authority. Curiosity becomes a threat, not because it's harmful, but because it might lead somewhere uncontrollable. That's the fear. Uncontrolled curiosity leads to inconvenient truths. It reveals hypocrisy, contradiction, injustice. And once you see those things, you can't unsee them. Now apply that pattern to adulthood. In your job, ask too many questions and you're not a team player. In your community, ask the wrong questions and you're causing trouble. Online, challenge the consensus and you're spreading misinformation. It doesn't matter if your questions are sincere or even correct. All that matters is that they disrupt comfort. Because comfort is the currency of control. And curiosity, real, relentless curiosity, destroys comfort. Curiosity doesn't respect sacred cows. It doesn't care about tradition. It doesn't yield to authority. It pulls at threads until something unravels. That's why curious people are often labeled arrogant, problematic, or radical. It's not that they know too much. It's that they won't stop asking. And here's the psychological trick. If you punish curiosity early enough, often enough, people start punishing themselves. They feel guilt for asking, shame for wanting to understand, fear for needing to know, so they stop. Not because they're convinced, but because they're tired of being treated like problems. And that's when the system wins. Because once people stop asking questions, they stop imagining alternatives. They stop resisting. They stop evolving. Punishing curiosity doesn't create better citizens. It creates quieter ones, more manageable, more obedient, easier to lead, easier to use. But let's make this personal. How many times have you silenced your own questions to keep the peace? How often have you bitten your tongue, told yourself it's not worth it, or pretended not to notice something that didn't add up? Those moments feel small, but they add up. They teach your mind to self-regulate, to suppress curiosity for safety. Over time, you stop even noticing the questions you don't ask. And that's the real tragedy. Because curiosity isn't just a path to knowledge, it's the foundation of identity. When you lose your curiosity, you lose your edge, your compass, your fire, and eventually you lose yourself. The most powerful systems don't outlaw rebellion, they redefine it. They turn curiosity into defiance, defiance into disobedience, and disobedience into danger. You learn to trade your questions for comfort, your doubts for belonging, your mind for acceptance. And then one day you wake up and you've forgotten what you were ever curious about in the first place. That's how control wins, not by force, but by convincing you that your silence is sanity. But the next time your mind starts whispering those uncomfortable questions, the ones that make you uneasy, make others squirm, make the ground beneath you shift, listen. Because maybe your discomfort isn't defiance. Maybe it's the first sign that you're finally thinking for yourself. And if that makes you dangerous, so be it. You're just getting started. You want to know what comes next. You need to. Because the real manipulation doesn't just silence questions, it sells you the answer. Have you ever noticed how quickly people applaud someone for agreeing, not for thinking deeply, not for challenging assumptions, just agreeing, nodding along, repeating the right slogans, endorsing the accepted view? It's almost magical, instant validation, admiration, even status. And the stranger part, the more blind the agreement, the more praise it tends to earn. It's a dangerous trade, critical thought. Exchanged for belonging, in many ways, our culture doesn't reward wisdom. It rewards obedience, especially when that obedience comes without hesitation. Blind agreement becomes a shortcut to social approval. People don't say, "Wow, that was a nuanced perspective." They say, "Finally, someone who gets it." And all it takes is parroting what they already believe. But why is that so effective? Because consensus feels safe. It feels like certainty. And when you reflect someone's views back at them without question, you make them feel secure. That security creates trust. And that trust elevates your status, even if you've contributed nothing of your own. This is the psychology of mimicry. Say what they want to hear, and you become what they want you to be. We like to think status is earned through merit, bravery, innovation, intelligence. But in the real world, status is often manufactured through conformity. You gain respect not by being insightful, but by being predictable. Agree with the right side at the right time, and suddenly you're seen as enlightened. The irony: most of the time you don't even have to believe it. You just have to signal it. It's a performance, a ritual, and like any ritual, it rewards precision, not originality. The sharper your mimicry, the higher your social currency climbs. You can climb the ladder of influence by simply parroting the tribe's beliefs, louder and faster than the next person. But what does this do to thought itself? It strangles it. The more we reward blind agreement with status, the less incentive there is to think independently. Questioning becomes risky, doubt becomes deviance, and those who hesitate to nod along are treated as obstacles, not contributors. So people stop hesitating, they stop asking, they surrender their intellect to maintain their place in the group. This is the silent pressure behind so many public opinions. Not truth, not exploration, just the fear of losing social standing. You'll see it in meetings, online debates, even in friendships. The person who questions the script is the person who suddenly seems difficult, dangerous, too intense. But the person who nods, who agrees without friction, they're elevated, celebrated, trusted. It's easier to follow the script than to rewrite it, and the system knows it. Power structures love blind agreement. Governments, corporations, ideologies, they all thrive when people stop thinking for themselves. That's why slogans are short. That's why messaging is simplified. Because complexity invites thought, and thought invites rebellion. Control doesn't need to be violent, it just needs to be rewarded. Reward someone enough for their agreement, and they'll start agreeing before you even finish your sentence. Think about political affiliations, social movements, influencer culture. The most celebrated voices are often not the most insightful, but the most aligned. They know exactly what to say, and exactly how to say it. Not to enlighten, but to signal allegiance. And the audience responds accordingly. With likes, with shares, with applause. Not for courage, but for loyalty. This is how we train ourselves to be manipulatable. Not with force, but with validation. Not through threats, but through praise. You don't need to scare people into compliance. Just promise them they'll be loved if they comply. But here's the catch. When status is tied to obedience, independence becomes dangerous. The moment you deviate from the script, you risk exile. The tribe that once elevated you now turns its back. You're labeled a traitor, a contrarian, a problem, and it doesn't matter how thoughtfully you disagree. What matters is that you stopped playing your role. So the fear grows. The silence thickens, and the most dangerous ideas in society aren't the ones being shouted. They're the ones no one dares to say. That's the cost of attaching status to blind agreement. It creates a world where silence is seen as wisdom, and agreement is mistaken for intelligence. Where thought is discouraged, where authenticity becomes a liability. And you start to wonder who you are without the applause. Because if your value depends on never questioning what happens the moment you finally do. It's not just about what you believe. It's about what you're allowed to say. And when you tie social rewards to silence, you don't just lose dissent, you lose discovery. Because every time someone agrees without thinking, a better idea dies. You're not supposed to notice this. You're supposed to feel grateful for the approval. You're supposed to confuse it with meaning. But the applause isn't for you. It's for the mask you're wearing, the script you're reading, the game you're playing. So ask yourself, is it really admiration if it's based on conformity? Is it really status if it's earned through silence? Or is it just obedience in disguise? You think you're rising, but you're just disappearing. And the scariest part, no one will tell you. They'll cheer while you vanish. What happens when the lie you've repeated for status becomes the only truth you're allowed to speak? You're about to find out why the next compliment you hear might be the most manipulative one of all. Have you ever noticed how flattery is weaponized? Not the obvious kind. Not the praise that makes you roll your eyes, but the subtle, calculated kind. The kind that tells you what you already want to believe. That you're too smart, too perceptive, too self-aware to be manipulated. It sounds like a compliment, but it's not. It's bait. Telling someone they're too smart to be fooled is one of the most reliable ways to fool them. Because once you believe you're immune, you stop checking for traps. You stop asking hard questions. You relax your defenses. And that's when you're most vulnerable, when you're absolutely certain you're not. Confidence becomes the camouflage. Arrogance becomes the leash. It's psychological sleight of hand. Make someone feel intelligent, and they'll overlook how they're being controlled. They'll think the idea was theirs, that the belief formed naturally, that their choices were free. But here's the catch. Real intelligence isn't immune to manipulation. It's actually more susceptible in one specific way: ego. The smarter someone is, the more complex the flattery needs to be. And so it evolves. It gets more elegant, more sophisticated. It mirrors your intellect back at you, until you fall in love with your own reflection. You're not being told what to think. You're being told you thought of it first. And the most terrifying part, it works. Think about how conspiracy theories spread. They don't appeal to ignorance. They appeal to self-importance. They say, you see through the lies. You're awake. Unlike the sheep, it flatters your intelligence while feeding you poison. It makes you feel like an insider, even as you're being pulled deeper into delusion. Think about how advertising works. It's not just about selling products, it's about selling identity. You're not buying sneakers, you're buying the image of someone who knows which sneakers matter. You're not choosing a brand, you're choosing the version of yourself that brand promises to reflect. And the whole time, you're thinking, I'm too smart to be influenced by this. But that's exactly what makes it work. Because once you're convinced you're above persuasion, persuasion slips in through the side door. This is why cults often recruit highly intelligent people. Not in spite of their intelligence, but because of it. People with high cognitive ability often crave meaning, coherence, narrative. They're drawn to systems that feel intellectually rigorous. So if a manipulator frames their ideology as for the enlightened few, those minds become playgrounds. You weren't tricked, you were chosen. That's the lie that seals the deal. In politics, it's even worse. Entire campaigns are built around appealing to your belief in your own discernment. You're not just voting, you're seeing the truth others can't. You're rising above the noise. You're rational. You're informed. And every time you hear someone else say, "How can people fall for that?" you nod in smug agreement, never realizing you already have. The illusion of immunity is the most dangerous trap, and we fall for it all the time. We assume the fooled are other people, less educated, less thoughtful, less capable. But this assumption is exactly what blinds us. Because it's not intelligence that keeps you safe. It's humility, skepticism, the constant awareness that no one is immune, not even you, especially not you. Every time you think you're too smart to be fooled, remember, that's the moment you're easiest to control. Because the smartest minds, once they believe in their own invulnerability, stop asking questions. And when the questions stop, the control begins. They don't need to silence you. They just need to convince you there's nothing left to ask. And if you ever start to question it all, if you ever begin to suspect that maybe, just maybe, you've been manipulated, they have one last line of defense. You're too smart to fall for that. But you did. We all do. And that's the point. Because the most effective manipulation doesn't look like force. It looks like flattery. And the most dangerous lie is the one you love to hear. You think the game's over, but it's just begun. Because the next move isn't to fool you. It's to make you chase a prize you'll never reach. Just close enough to see. Just far enough to keep running. Imagine playing a game that never ends. Not because you love it, but because you're convinced you're about to win. Just one more move. Just one more hour. Just one more sacrifice. That's the secret, not keeping you trapped by force, but by hope. Keep the game unwinnable, but always just one step away. This is the architecture of control. Not overt, not obvious. It's designed to keep you motivated enough to try, but never empowered enough to succeed. Look around you. The job market dangles the next promotion just out of reach. The education system promises success after just one more degree. Relationships ask for just one more compromise. Society whispers, you're almost there, and you believe it, because stopping feels like failure and quitting feels like weakness. It's a treadmill disguised as a staircase. We're taught from childhood that hard work pays off. That effort guarantees reward. But no one mentions the invisible hand constantly moving the finish line. Take the corporate ladder. You're told to hustle, to stay late, to outwork everyone. But the promotions are selective, the criteria vague, and the goalposts constantly shift. What you did last year isn't enough this year. There's always someone faster, younger, more connected. You're not being evaluated, you're being kept in motion. Because motion feels like progress, and progress feels like purpose. But what if the purpose is the trap? This tactic appears in every corner of modern life. Think of social media, algorithms engineered to keep you scrolling, always chasing one more like, one more follower, one more viral hit. You never get enough because enough doesn't exist. It's designed to feel just out of reach. Now consider health and beauty. One more product, one more workout, one more surgery. You're almost perfect, they say. Just one more tweak. The industry doesn't sell results. It sells pursuit. Even love can become a loop. You give more, forgive more, try harder, because maybe this time they'll change. Maybe this time you'll finally feel seen. But nothing improves. You're just led to believe it will. Hope becomes a leash. This illusion of near success exploits your psychology. Behavioral economists call it the near-miss effect. The same mechanism used in slot machines. Almost winning keeps you addicted more than actual success. Almost is the drug. Almost is the prison. It's not failure that traps you. It's the illusion of impending victory. This tactic doesn't just waste your time. It drains your identity. You become someone who believes in potential more than reality. You start investing not in truth, but in possibility. You stop measuring progress by outcomes and start measuring it by effort. Because effort is all you're ever allowed to give. And when you burn out, when you collapse from chasing something that never arrives, they don't blame the system. They blame you. You didn't try hard enough. You weren't patient enough. You weren't positive enough. The trap is self-sustaining. It breaks you, then convinces you. The breakage is your fault. But the truth is simpler. The game was never meant to be won. It was meant to keep you playing. Because an unwinnable game isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. You're not failing to achieve your goals. You're succeeding in sustaining theirs. They don't want you content. Content people stop consuming. They don't want you fulfilled. Fulfilled people don't obey. They want you chasing, striving, reaching for a carrot that never existed. And when you finally start asking, why am I doing this? They say, you're almost there, but you're not. You were never meant to be. So stop. Step off the treadmill. Let the game collapse without your energy feeding it. Because the moment you stop playing, you start living. When you realize the game was designed to be unwinnable, you're free to start designing a life that isn't. You've spent years getting closer to a finish line that only moves further away. But what if the real move, the only one that matters, is stepping off the board entirely? They told you quitting was failure. But maybe it's the only way to win. You've been chasing the next level for too long. But what if the next level isn't up? What if it's out? And once you see that, you can never unsee it. You can never pretend again that the game was fair or that you were ever meant to win. You finally realize freedom doesn't come from finishing. It comes from refusing to play. You were never losing. You were being used. Now what will you do with that truth? Because the next trap is already being built, and it's designed to sound exactly like your dreams. You'll want to hear more. But first, ask yourself, what if the words that comfort you most are actually the ones that keep you blind? Stay sharp, because what's coming next doesn't care how awake you think you are. Have you ever noticed how certain phrases slip into your mind and settle there, unquestioned? It is what it is. We're all in this together. Trust the process. These aren't just casual sayings. They're verbal sedatives, linguistic lullabies. They exist to disarm you, to pacify the part of your brain that should be screaming. These phrases are shortcuts, psychological backdoors. When someone uses them, they're not just communicating, they're programming, because repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds trust. The more often you hear a phrase, the less you question it. And once something feels familiar, it starts to feel true. This is the power of loaded language. It's not about what the words mean, it's about what they stop you from thinking. Take freedom isn't free. Sounds noble, right? Patriotic. But listen closely, it's a trap. A linguistic Trojan horse designed to justify war, surveillance, sacrifice. The phrase doesn't invite discussion. It shuts it down. It implies that if you question the cost, you're ungrateful. If you ask who's paying that price or why, you're a traitor. The phrase does the thinking for you. Or thoughts and prayers. It's a ritual phrase. Repeated so often, it's become semantic wallpaper. It signals compassion without requiring action. It's not that the sentiment is false, it's that it's weaponized, deployed to deflect criticism. To say, we've done enough when nothing has been done at all. Politicians, corporations, influencers, they all use this trick. They wrap manipulation in cozy, recognizable phrases. It's not just about controlling narrative. It's about bypassing your cognitive firewall. Support our troops. It's a phrase that smuggles in a host of assumptions. It doesn't just ask for empathy. It demands agreement with policies, budgets, ideologies. To question it is to risk social exile. Because familiar phrases aren't just comforting, they're enforced. The technique works even better in personal relationships. It's for your own good. I know what's best for you. These are the phrases abusers use to turn control into care. They create doubt. They sound protective, but they're not. They're declarations of dominance disguised as affection. This is how language becomes a weapon, a kind of soft tyranny. It doesn't hit you, it hugs you. It wraps itself around your mind like a warm blanket, gently smothering dissent. And the most dangerous part, you start using these phrases on yourself. You say everything happens for a reason when you're too scared to face the randomness of suffering. You say it could be worse to avoid acknowledging that what you're experiencing is already bad. You parrot cliches because they offer emotional insulation from reality, but that insulation comes at a cost. It dulls your awareness, it disables your capacity for honest, painful, necessary thought. This isn't about cynicism, it's about clarity. The truth is, language is never neutral. Every word you hear, every phrase you repeat, is either reinforcing your autonomy or eroding it. So start listening, not just to what's being said, but to why it's being said. Ask what a phrase is asking you to stop thinking about. Ask, whose interests it serves. Because once you start paying attention, you realize something deeply unsettling. A lot of what you believe didn't come from you. It came from the words you didn't question. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most effective mind game of all, the illusion that the thoughts in your head are truly yours. You were taught to hear comfort in those phrases. But what if they were cages all along? You'll want to keep listening, because next you'll discover why silence isn't safe either, especially when you're the first one brave enough to break it. Imagine you're in a room full of people. Silence hangs heavy in the air, not because no one has anything to say, but because no one wants to be the first to say it. It's a strange kind of tension, isn't it? You feel it in classrooms, boardrooms, and even family dinners, that anxious stillness, that invisible hand that seems to press down on your chest. The moment you consider speaking first, you hesitate. Not because you don't have thoughts, but because you're afraid. Afraid of being wrong, afraid of being different, afraid of being seen. This fear doesn't come from nowhere. It's taught, conditioned, engineered. Being the first to speak is dangerous, not because of what you might say, but because it breaks the unspoken social contract. You risk disrupting the illusion of consensus. You risk standing out, and standing out means becoming a target. This tactic of making you afraid to be the first to speak is one of the most effective forms of social control. Because if nobody speaks first, nobody speaks at all. Silence becomes safety. Agreement becomes default. And those in power, they win by doing absolutely nothing. It starts early. You're taught to raise your hand, to wait your turn, to speak only when called on. And even then, you'd better have the right answer. Make a mistake, and the consequences aren't just correction, they're humiliation, laughter, rejection. So you learn to wait. You learn to listen first, not to understand, but to conform. You start scanning the room. Who's nodding? Who's frowning? Who's quiet? You want to gauge the temperature before you dare step into the heat. And in that hesitation, your voice dies. This isn't just about etiquette. It's about hierarchy. The more silence there is, the more powerful the loudest voice becomes. Not because they're right, but because they spoke first. People confuse confidence with correctness. Whoever speaks first shapes the frame. They define the question before anyone else has a chance to challenge it. And by the time they're done, your thoughts feel like echoes instead of ideas. So you stay silent, and your silence becomes approval. You think you're being careful, strategic, but to those watching, your silence looks like agreement, complicity, consent. And the system loves that. It loves when you self-censor. It loves when you let fear override your thoughts. Because the more you doubt yourself, the easier you are to manage. Think about social media. The moment someone posts something controversial, the first responses set the tone. Are they supportive, outraged, mocking? That tone trickles down. It becomes dangerous to dissent. And once again, silence becomes safety. It's not just fear of being wrong, it's fear of being alone. This is how groupthink takes root. Not with lies, but with silence. When no one is brave enough to challenge the narrative becomes truth. Not because it's true, but because it's unopposed. This tactic works on every level, from classrooms to governments. Suppress the first voice, and you suppress all others. Make speaking up feel risky, and you control the conversation, without ever having to say a word. That's the genius of it. It's not censorship, it's psychological suppression. They don't need to silence you. They just need to make you silence yourself. And over time, that fear calcifies. It becomes habit. You wait to see what others think. You second-guess your instincts. You defer, delay, disappear. until you forget what your own voice even sounds like. But here's the truth. They don't want you to realize the first voice doesn't have to be the loudest. It just has to be the bravest. You don't have to have the perfect answer. You don't have to be right. You just have to be willing to go first. Because every time someone does, they create permission. They crack the silence wide open. They give others the courage to follow. And that's what power really fears. Not rebellion, not violence, but a single voice that refuses to wait. Because that's how change starts. Not with consensus, but with discomfort. So the next time you're in that room, feeling the weight of silence, watching others scan the floor, instead of speaking up, ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? And what might happen if you weren't? Because someone always speaks first. And if it's not you, it'll be someone else shaping the world you have to live in. Maybe it's time you stopped waiting. They've taught you to be silent, but they've underestimated how much you've been thinking. You don't need permission. You just need to start. If you're feeling that tension right now, hold on to it, because what comes next doesn't just want your silence. It wants your surrender, and it's counting on you being too tired to fight back. You're exhausted, but you don't know why. You just feel it under the surface of everything. The slow, grinding weight of days that all look the same. The endless meetings, the meaningless metrics, the polite nods when you want to scream. Then somewhere along the way, you stopped asking questions. You stopped speaking up. Not because you don't care, but because you're too tired to. And that's the plan. You think burnout is a symptom. It's not. It's the strategy. You're not failing. You're being worn down on purpose. You weren't silenced with threats. You were silenced with spreadsheets, performance reviews, and polite applause. You were given just enough praise to keep going, just enough comfort to stay quiet, just enough fear to keep your head down. Because if you spoke up, really spoke up, what would happen? You'd disrupt the workflow. You'd ruin the culture. You'd make things uncomfortable. And in a system built on fragile comfort, discomfort is the only real threat. So the system does something clever. It doesn't gag you. It drains you. You're flooded with tasks. Your calendar is a minefield. Your phone never stops vibrating. Every alert, every ping, every last-minute demand chips away at your energy. Not enough to collapse you. Just enough to keep you in a state of low-grade depletion. Why? Because people on the edge don't rebel, they retreat. They don't march, they nap. They don't write manifestos. They draft polite resignation letters. And that's how it wins. Burnout isn't chaos, it's control. It's the perfect form of suppression, because it wears the mask of productivity. You're not angry, you're tired. You're not disillusioned, you're just going through a rough patch. You've learned to call it normal. But here's the truth. Exhaustion isn't natural. It's engineered. You're meant to be too tired to care, too tired to think, too tired to fight. Every time you almost say something about the injustice, the hypocrisy, the absurdity, you stop yourself. Not because you agree, but because you can't find the strength. That's not a personal failing, that's conditioning. The system would rather let you burn out than speak out, and it works. Burned out people apologize for things that aren't their fault. They take on tasks they shouldn't. They smile when they want to scream. They forget how to feel anger without shame or clarity without fear. You become grateful just to survive the week. And that's when you know you've been broken in. But what happens when you finally collapse? When you can't take it anymore, you're replaced. Quietly, efficiently. The same way a printer gets swapped out or a broken chair is wheeled away. There's no grand reckoning, no justice. Just someone else sliding into your spot, fresher, more compliant, not yet burned out. It wasn't your role that mattered, it was your silence. And now someone else will carry it. This is why the system fears honesty more than failure. A person who fails is replaceable, but a person who speaks, who actually names what's broken, that's a threat. But to get there, you have to reclaim your voice before it's gone completely. You have to see burnout not as weakness, but as evidence of strength misused, hope misdirected, energy stolen. Burnout means you cared, you tried, you gave everything. Now it's time to take something back. Your clarity, your boundaries, your right to say no without apology, your right to feel rage without guilt, your right to stop sacrificing yourself just to keep the peace. Because the moment you speak, not politely, not passively, but truthfully, is the moment you become unmanageable. And unmanageable people can't be controlled. You weren't meant to be silent. You were just trained to believe silence was noble. It's not, it's submission, dressed in professionalism. Let them call you difficult. Let them call you disruptive. Let them call you dangerous. Because when the system would rather let you burn out than speak out, danger is the only honest thing you can be. So don't wait until your voice is gone. Don't wait until you're replaceable. Speak, because silence doesn't protect you. It erases you. You were never meant to burn quietly. You were meant to be heard. You've been punished for being loud. But soon you'll be rewarded for enduring. And that reward is more dangerous than the silence. Keep listening. Keep watching. You're about to see how suffering becomes identity. Have you ever noticed how often the people who suffer the most wear their pain like a badge of honor, as if enduring trauma somehow makes them more real, more worthy, more them? It's not just that suffering leaves scars, it becomes a story that slowly transforms into identity. That's the trick. That's the trap. When you suffer, the pain is immediate, overwhelming, undeniable. You crave meaning. You need to believe it mattered, that it shaped you, strengthened you, gave you something in return. So you weave it into your narrative. You begin to think, this is who I am now. You stop seeing suffering as something that happened to you and start seeing it as the foundation of who you are. But here's the unsettling part. Society rewards you for this. We celebrate survivors, not just for surviving, but for becoming their suffering. We applaud the person who turned their pain into purpose, not because they healed, but because they performed their trauma in a way we could consume. Suffering becomes currency. And the more visibly you wear it, the more credibility you're given. Think about it. In conversations, in communities, even in activism, the loudest voices often come from those with the deepest wounds. Not because they're necessarily the wisest, but because pain gives them moral leverage. Identity becomes intertwined with injury. And slowly, subtly, suffering stops being a phase and becomes a performance. You may not realize it at first. It starts innocently enough, sharing your story, expressing your truth. But over time, repetition sets in. The story calcifies. You repeat it so many times, it becomes a script you can't deviate from. Because every time you try to grow beyond it, you feel like you're betraying your past. Like you're erasing the version of you that endured so much. You're not just seen as someone who suffered. You're expected to stay that way, and there's power in that expectation. Attention, sympathy, a kind of authority. But it's a prison, too, because if your worth is measured by how much you've suffered, then healing threatens your identity. Getting better means losing your status. Letting go of the pain means letting go of who you've become. So you hold on. You continue to define yourself by your trauma, not because you want to, but because the world has convinced you it's the only part of you that matters. And when that belief takes root, it controls you more effectively than any oppressor ever could. You become self-policing. You sabotage growth. You seek out relationships and environments that reaffirm your pain, not because you're broken, but because you've been trained to believe that wholeness would make you invisible. This isn't just personal, it's systemic. Our culture thrives on narrative identities. It wants to sort people into categories: the abused, the addict, the survivor, the victim. Labels become shorthand. Easy to understand, easy to package, easy to manage. But they don't leave room for complexity, for contradiction, for becoming something new. And so suffering isn't just endured, it's branded, marketed, monetized. Your pain becomes your profile. Your identity becomes a job. You're not a person anymore, you're a persona. And the more you lean into that persona, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before the suffering. If that version of you ever even existed, because after a while, pain doesn't just shape your story, it becomes the only story you know how to tell. But here's the question you never hear: what happens if you stop telling it? Who are you when you're no longer the one who was hurt? Who are you when your story no longer centers around what was taken from you? Most people never find out because the system doesn't want them to. Identity built on suffering is predictable, contained, controlled. It ensures loyalty to the systems that offer recognition. It keeps you dependent on a world that only listens when you're in pain. And so long as that's true, healing will always feel like a betrayal. But what if it isn't? What if the real betrayal is believing that your suffering is the most important thing about you? What if your pain isn't your identity, but your beginning? You don't owe your trauma a lifetime of loyalty. You don't have to keep feeding it for it to matter. You can remember, you can honor, you can grow, and still let it go. Because the most radical thing you can do in a world that rewards suffering with identity is to heal anyway. Even if it makes you disappear. Even if no one claps for you anymore. Even if it means starting over without the story. You are not what happened to you. You're what you choose to become in spite of it. The people who want to keep you in your pain don't fear your weakness. They fear your power. The power to move on, to break the narrative, to be free. And you will never find that freedom in a story designed to keep you suffering. Let it burn. Whatever you're about to hear next, it only makes sense if you're willing to leave behind everything you thought you knew. Especially the parts that felt safest. Especially the parts that hurt the most. Collapse truth into popularity. It sounds like a glitch in logic, like a system error in how we understand the world. But it's not. It's the dominant operating system of modern reality. Because in a world drowning in content and starving for attention, the truth no longer needs to be accurate. It just needs to be liked. Let that sink in. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones shouted by villains. They're the ones whispered sweetly by crowds. Liked, shared, reposted, upvoted, and over time believed, not because they're true, but because they're popular. This is the death of truth, by applause. And it's happening everywhere. We used to think truth was something we discovered, through evidence, logic, observation. Now it's something we manufacture, something we package and pitch, something we poll test and optimize for engagement. And the terrifying part, it works, because most people don't want the truth. They want relief. They want entertainment. They want confirmation that what they already believe is correct. And algorithms, those invisible gatekeepers, learn quickly. They don't show you what's true. They show you what works, what keeps you watching, clicking, buying. And what works is whatever makes you feel good, or outraged, or superior, or afraid. Emotion sells, certainty sells, simplicity sells. Truth, it's messy, it's complicated, it's boring, so we streamline it, flatten it, collapse it into something bite-sized, tweetable, memeable. We strip it of nuance until all that's left is a slogan, a soundbite, a headline that feels right, even if it's completely wrong, and slowly, silently, something shifts. Truth becomes a performance, a popularity contest, a game of optics and impressions. You don't need to be honest, you just need to look like you are. You don't need facts, you need followers. The crowd becomes the jury, and every lie with enough applause becomes indistinguishable from fact. This is not a glitch. It's the system working as designed. It's why misinformation spreads faster than truth. It's why conspiracy theories thrive. It's why influencers become authorities and scientists get drowned out by TikTok charisma. It's why the person who yells the loudest wins, even if they're screaming nonsense. The truth doesn't die in silence. It dies from being ignored. And here's the twist. We help kill it. Every time we like something, because it feels right, instead of checking if it is. Every time we share without reading. Every time we reward confidence over competence, style over substance, presentation over proof. Truth isn't being stolen from us. We're trading it voluntarily. We're exchanging it for validation, community, comfort. We're choosing popularity over reality because popularity is easier to live with. But it comes at a price. Because when truth becomes flexible, malleable, negotiable, everything becomes uncertain. Science, history, morality, identity, nothing stays solid. And in that void, power rushes in. Whoever controls the narrative controls reality. And narratives, they don't need to be true. They just need to trend. So here's the uncomfortable question. Do you want the truth, or do you want to belong? Because often, you can't have both. The truth makes you unpopular. It alienates. It challenges. It confronts people with what they don't want to see. And in a world where status is measured by attention, being right is less important than being liked. You're told to speak your truth, but only if it aligns with the tribe, only if it's safe, only if it gets likes. And when truth and popularity collide, popularity wins, every time. Unless you resist, unless you choose silence over applause, reality over reassurance. Unless you stop playing the game and start asking harder questions about yourself, your beliefs, your sources of certainty. Because in the end, truth won't fight for itself. It won't shout over the noise. It won't go viral. It waits to be found. And only by those who are willing to be unpopular to see it. You say you want the truth, but can you survive being the only one who sees it? You might have to, because the applause isn't coming back. Not for you, not for the truth. If that makes your chest tighten, it should. Because what comes next isn't going to feel better. It's going to feel safer, easier, more comforting than real freedom ever could. Imagine you're offered a warm blanket on a cold night. You're shivering, vulnerable, desperate for relief. Someone hands it to you with a smile, not asking for anything in return, just comfort, just peace. And in that moment, you don't care what it costs, because it feels like safety. It feels like kindness. But that blanket, it's laced with invisible thread. It's the first layer of a net. That's how control begins. The most effective form of manipulation isn't force, it's comfort. Comfort disarms resistance. It doesn't demand compliance, it seduces, Why fight for freedom when you can be comfortable instead? Freedom is messy. It's uncertain. It requires effort, decisions, risk. But comfort is simple, predictable, clean. And over time, if offered consistently enough, it starts to feel like a fair trade. You give up a little autonomy, a little privacy, a little control over your own decisions. In return, you get stability, convenience, safety. It feels reasonable, even wise. But what you don't realize is that the trade never stops. Each step seems small until you look back and realize how far you've been led. We rarely notice how often comfort is used as a substitute for freedom. Take the workplace, a steady paycheck, health insurance, free snacks, flexible hours. These are all comforts, but they're not freedom. You're still told when to show up, what to wear, what to think. You're still penalized for speaking out or dreaming bigger than the box you're assigned. Yet the comforts are enough to make most people stay, to comply, to smile and say, "I'm lucky to have this." Or politics. We're told not to worry. The experts are handling it. The government will take care of us. Just keep scrolling, keep consuming, keep trusting that things are fine. Don't look too closely. Don't ask too many questions. If you just play along, you'll be left alone, safe, comfortable. But the comfort they offer is conditional. It's revoked the moment you step out of line. Try to live differently. Try to speak up. Suddenly, that warmth turns cold. The smile disappears. Then you're reminded, this wasn't real safety. This was rented silence. Even in our personal lives, the pattern repeats. Relationships that feel soothing at first slowly become cages. We don't leave bad situations because they're painful. We stay in them because they're familiar, comfortable. The brain confuses routine with safety. We'd rather tolerate quiet misery than risk the unknown. And that's the trick. Comfort isn't just a feeling, it's a system of reward. It reinforces obedience. It teaches you that ease comes not from freedom, but from surrender, from playing the role, from fitting in. You stop asking, "Is this what I want?" and start asking, "Can I live with this?" That's when they've got you. That's when the bars of the cage are no longer visible, because they feel like home. Even language is weaponized. We're told to be grateful, to not rock the boat, to keep your head down. We're warned that those who fight for more often lose what little they had. So we rationalize, we shrink, we settle. Comfort becomes the boundary of our ambition. It teaches us to fear change more than stagnation, to avoid risk more than regret. And in doing so, it quietly replaces freedom with familiarity. But here's the unsettling part. Most people don't even realize it's happening, because comfort doesn't scream. It whispers, it lulls, it flatters. And once you've had a taste, it's hard to let go. So ask yourself, how much of your life is shaped by what makes you free versus what makes you comfortable? How often have you chosen not to speak, not to act, not to dream, because it might disrupt your peace? And whose peace is it, really? Comfort isn't evil, but when it's offered instead of freedom, it becomes a leash. Decorated, soft, but a leash, all the same. The question isn't whether you're comfortable. The question is, at what cost? Because if you're not careful, you'll wake up one day wrapped in softness and realize you can't move. You've traded the possibility of everything for the certainty of nothing. And the worst part, you'll still think you're free. They don't need to chain you. They just need to make you want to stay where you are. You won't even see the door behind you slowly close. What comes next will make you question why we praise conformity while disguising it as humility. Imagine being punished not for doing wrong, but for thinking differently. You're in a classroom. The teacher asks a question. You raise your hand, not with the answer they expect, but with something better, smarter, clearer, more honest. The room goes quiet. The teacher doesn't praise you. Instead, you see it in their eyes. Irritation, not because you're wrong, but because you've disrupted the script. You didn't play along. You made them feel small, and so they do what the system always does with outliers. They punish you. They won't call it punishment. They'll call it correction, guidance, socialization. But make no mistake, it's a message: think differently, and you'll pay the price. This is how conformity is enforced. Not through overt violence, but through emotional conditioning. It starts early. We're taught that questioning is arrogance, that dissent is disrespect, that if you see something others don't, you must be mistaken, or worse, dangerous. The unspoken rule: don't think too hard, don't reach too far, stay in line. Why? Because independent thought threatens control. It undermines authority. It creates uncertainty. Systems, whether schools, corporations, or governments, are built on predictability, on obedience. An individual thinker is a disruption, and disruptions are liabilities. So they get labeled arrogant, difficult, egotistical, thinks they're smarter than everyone else. Not because they're wrong, but because they refuse to kneel at the altar of consensus. This labeling is strategic. It reframes insight as ego, intellect as vanity. The thinker isn't wise. They're full of themselves. And so the crowd turns on them, not because they disagree, but because they've been trained to distrust anyone who steps outside the mental perimeter. The crowd becomes the enforcer. Social disapproval is more effective than any punishment. It's quiet, subtle, devastating. Think of how often brilliance is recast as arrogance. Galileo, Malala, Snowden. They weren't punished because they were wrong. They were punished because they challenged the framework, because they refused to bow. The irony is bitter. True, humility lies in questioning, in admitting the limits of collective wisdom. But the system flips it. It says humility is silence, agreement, deference. Sit down, nod along. Don't make others uncomfortable by thinking too loudly. And here's where it gets darker. Eventually, people start censoring themselves. They feel the weight of disapproval before they even speak. They water down their ideas, hide their doubts, not because they believe they're wrong, but because they've learned that standing out means standing alone. Self-censorship becomes survival. Now imagine a society made of people who all think quietly, carefully, inside approved lines. No one questions, no one pushes, no one risks sounding arrogant. It's peaceful, cooperative, silent. But beneath the surface, it's dying, because progress comes from friction, from challenge, from the uncomfortable voice in the back of the room, asking, "But what if we're wrong?" The most terrifying control is the kind you enforce on yourself. This is how the game is played. Arrogance isn't the real crime. Disruption is. Thinking differently is dangerous because it pulls at the seams of the narrative. And once one person sees the whole, others start to look too. That's the real fear, not the thinker, but the spark they might ignite. Because one person asking hard questions can unravel the illusion for everyone else. So if you ever find yourself labeled arrogant for thinking differently, consider this. Maybe you're not being punished for overestimating yourself. Maybe you're being punished for seeing too clearly. And maybe the only true arrogance is believing the world should never be questioned. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet pressure to shrink your thoughts, to dim your mind, to avoid being too much. That's not humility, that's control. And now that you see it, you have a choice. Silence yourself to be liked, or speak up and be free. You already know what they'll prefer. But what do you? You feel it now, the resistance tightening in your chest, the urge to speak that won't go away. And that's exactly what you need to hold on to. Because next, it's not just about being silenced. It's about how they use confusion to make sure no one even knows what to say. Have you ever noticed how complexity is used not to enlighten, but to silence? You ask a simple question, say about the fairness of a policy or the ethics of a new technology, and what do you get back? A flood of jargon, diagrams, statistics, and legalese. Not a clear answer. Not even a real conversation. Just layers upon layers of convoluted logic designed to do one thing: shut you down. This tactic works because we're trained to equate complexity with authority. When someone speaks in technical language you don't understand, your instinct is to assume they must be smarter, that you must be wrong, that you should sit down and shut up. But this isn't intelligence. It's camouflage. Because real understanding isn't complex. It's clarity. If something can't be explained simply, it usually means someone doesn't want it understood. This isn't just academic snobbery. It's a form of control. Look at how governments pass legislation. Hundreds of pages long, buried in subclauses, filled with cross-references and legal terms no average citizen could possibly navigate. You ask what the bill does, and you're told it's complicated. But it's not complicated. It's deliberate. Complexity isn't a side effect. It's the goal. Why? Because confusion breeds passivity. If you feel out of your depth, you're less likely to protest, less likely to dissent, more likely to defer to the so-called experts, even when what they're saying makes no moral or logical sense. It happens in medicine, too. A patient questions a treatment plan, and instead of a straight answer, they get a flood of medical terminology. It's not about informing them. It's about overwhelming them, making them feel small, ignorant, powerless. The same tactic plays out in finance, in education, in tech. Overcomplication becomes a gatekeeping tool, keeping you from participating, from challenging, from even asking questions. And then there's media. Ever notice how news panels turn every issue into a chaotic mess of competing voices, obscure references, and theoretical framing? It's not an accident. It's not to help you understand. It's to make you feel like understanding is impossible. Like there are no clear sides, no obvious truths, just noise, so you disengage. But it doesn't stop there. This tactic infiltrates personal conversations too. Ever try confronting someone about a boundary they crossed, and suddenly you're lost in a sea of context and complications and nuance until you're questioning whether the original harm even happened? This is the interpersonal version of bureaucratic gaslighting, a way to derail your voice by drowning it in details. Because here's the secret they don't want you to know. Complexity can be real, but when it's weaponized, it's not meant to inform, it's meant to disarm. This is especially dangerous because it doesn't feel aggressive. It feels intellectual, civilized, like a respectful disagreement. But it's a trap, because while you're busy trying to understand their complex perspective, they've already won. They've hijacked the conversation, reframed the argument, and re-established control. You can't fight what you can't define. And if everything is always too complicated to define, you're permanently on defense. The irony: the biggest questions we face about fairness, ethics, power are often the simplest, but they're buried under layers of needless sophistication to keep you from seeing that. Because simple truths are dangerous. They're accessible, they spread, they empower. Imagine if everyone clearly understood how wealth moves, how laws are passed, how power is distributed. Imagine if everyone could explain, in plain language what's really happening. That clarity would be explosive. So clarity must be prevented. And that's why complexity is such an effective weapon. Not because it reveals the truth, but because it hides it. So next time someone tells you an issue is too complex to understand, ask yourself, are they trying to educate you or control you? Are they opening the door or shutting it in your face? Because if their goal was truly transparency, they'd make it make sense. They'd help you understand. But if their goal is power, they'll wrap the truth in so many layers, you'll forget you even asked the question in the first place. And that's how silence is engineered, not through threats, but through fog. You don't need a PhD to question injustice. You don't need a glossary to recognize corruption. Trust your instincts. Demand clarity. And remember, confusion isn't your fault, it's their strategy. Stay with that discomfort. Stay with that suspicion. Because the next manipulation won't just confuse you, it will convince you that asking questions makes you the enemy. Have you ever been punished for asking the right question? Not overtly, not with handcuffs or a courtroom, but with silence, with side eyes, with the quiet erosion of trust. One day you're a friend, a teammate, a citizen. The next, you're the problem. Not because you broke the rules, but because you questioned them. This is how dissent is neutralized, not by banning it, but by branding it. Make dissent feel like betrayal, not just to authority, but to the people around you. Your co-workers, your friends, your family. Convince them that disagreement isn't just wrong, it's dangerous, disloyal, ungrateful. That's the trick. Turn independent thought into a moral failing. This isn't new. Authoritarian regimes have always used this tactic. Stalin didn't just eliminate his enemies, he made them look like traitors to their own comrades. China's Cultural Revolution turned children against parents, students against teachers. Loyalty wasn't to truth, it was to the narrative, the party, the greater good. And when the stakes are high enough, when survival depends on conformity, betrayal becomes indistinguishable from bravery. But this doesn't only happen in totalitarian states. It happens at work, in your friend group. Online, watch what happens when someone says something unpopular. Not hateful, not cruel, just inconvenient. Watch the shift, the glances, the subtle distancing. The unspoken calculation. If I support them, I might get dragged down too. You don't have to jail people to silence them. Just make others fear associating with them. It's not just fear of punishment, it's fear of exclusion, of losing the safety of the group. And nothing scares the human brain more than isolation. We are wired to belong. We fear being cut off more than being wrong. So systems use that fear. Not with explicit threats, but with the slow tightening of the social leash. It's step too far out of line, and the leash snaps. You're no longer one of us. It's more effective than censorship, because it doesn't feel imposed. It feels organic. You think you're making a personal choice to distance yourself. You think your discomfort is your own, but it's not. It's engineered. Engineered through language. Through culture, through slogans like, if you're not with us, you're against us. Through codes of loyalty that sound noble but serve control. Through appeals to unity that disguise conformity. And the more you internalize these rules, the more you become a self-policing agent of the very system you fear. You edit your words. You shrink your opinions. You nod along even when something feels off. Because it's safer to be agreeable than to be alone. But what if someone you care about dares to speak? What if they say the thing you've only dared to think? Do you support them, or do you flinch? Pull away, tell yourself they went too far. That's the moment that matters. Because that's when you decide, are you loyal to truth or just loyal to safety? Dissent, real dissent, doesn't feel noble. It feels dangerous. It's not cheered in the moment. It's punished, ridiculed, misunderstood. History may vindicate it, but the present almost never does. That's why so few people do it. Because the cost is immediate, the praise is distant, and the pain is personal. But here's the deeper danger. When we make dissent feel like betrayal, we lose our immune system. We lose the only mechanism that keeps power accountable. We trade truth for comfort, and we don't even realize what we've given up until it's too late. So the next time someone challenges the script, don't rush to judge. Don't rush to defend the status quo. Ask yourself, are they really betraying you, or are they trying to wake you up? And are you silencing them? Because you know deep down they're right. You don't have to agree with every dissenter, but you should fear a world where dissent feels like treason, because that world doesn't protect you. It only controls you. They won't need to imprison your body when they've already captured your conscience. You just have to make betrayal look like dissent, and make dissent feel like betrayal, and the rest will police itself. You might think you're free, but the moment you hesitate to speak because of how it might look, that freedom is already gone. What you say next, or don't say at all, will decide who you are, the prisoner or the guard. If that makes you uncomfortable, stay with it. Because where we're going next, comfort becomes a weapon of its own, and you'll need to know the difference between freedom and the illusion of choice. What if I told you freedom was never about choice? What if the overwhelming sea of options you swim in every day isn't a sign of liberty, but a clever illusion designed to keep you distracted, overwhelmed, and ultimately controlled? That's the quiet trick behind modern freedom. It's been replaced with endless options, not better options, just more. You're surrounded by choices, dozens of streaming services, hundreds of apps, thousands of products, millions of opinions. But how many of those choices actually matter? How many change your life? And how many simply keep you busy, clicking, scrolling, choosing, without ever realizing you're stuck? This is the tyranny of abundance. See, real freedom, the kind that matters, means autonomy. It means time, focus, clarity, the ability to act with intention. But the more choices you're given, the less you actually choose, because your attention becomes fragmented, your will diluted. You don't act, you react. You don't decide, you select. You become a participant in someone else's script. This isn't accidental. It's psychological warfare dressed as convenience. The human brain isn't built for this many choices. When overwhelmed, it defaults to the easiest path, the most familiar brand, the loudest opinion. Choice becomes paralysis. Paralysis becomes dependence. And dependence, that's the key to control. Think about it. You walk into a store with 50 brands of toothpaste. You feel like you're in control. But you're not choosing dental hygiene, you're choosing packaging, marketing, slight variations designed to mimic freedom. You leave feeling empowered, but nothing essential has changed. You were never free. You were just busy. Now scale that up. Politics, media, relationships, identity. Every area of your life flooded with options, curated, manipulated, and sold to you under the banner of self-expression. But all this variety does something dangerous. It scatters your sense of self. You become a collage of choices you never really made. And here's the disturbing part. The more options you have, the less likely you are to notice the one option that's missing. The option to opt out. Real freedom would mean stepping away from the conveyor belt, saying no to the menu, creating something outside the framework you've been given. But you're never taught how. You're taught that freedom is the menu. That rebellion is just choosing a different brand. But rebellion isn't picking Coke over Pepsi. It's asking why you need soda in the first place. This illusion of choice numbs you. It pacifies dissent. It replaces political engagement with performative outrage. It replaces meaning with preference. And the longer you swim in these endless options, the less you remember what true freedom feels like. Because freedom isn't about having more, it's about needing less. It's about clarity, purpose, and saying no with intention. And that kind of freedom, that's dangerous to those in power. Because someone who doesn't need their products, their platforms, or their approval can't be controlled. So next time you feel overwhelmed by choice, ask yourself, am I actually free or just endlessly occupied? Because the surest way to keep someone compliant is to make them feel like they're in control while ensuring they never really are. You think you're choosing, but the game was rigged the moment you stepped in. And the longer you play it, the more you forget that the most radical act of freedom is to stop playing altogether. You've been trained to drown in options, but there's power in silence, power in simplicity, power in walking away from a system that needs your constant engagement to survive. Because once you stop mistaking distraction for freedom, you begin to see who really benefits when you stay overwhelmed. They've given you everything, except the ability to question the game itself. But that moment, the moment you begin to wonder, that's when the illusion starts to crack. You've only just begun to notice the cage. Now ask yourself, what else has been hidden in plain sight? Stay with this, because what happens next is far more dangerous than distraction. It's weaponized outrage, and it's coming for your rights. Imagine a room full of people screaming, not out of pain, but in rage, angry about a headline, furious about a tweet, outraged over a symbol, a word, a gesture. Their voices echo, their faces twist, their fingers point. It looks like engagement. It feels like passion, but it's something else entirely. It's distraction. And while everyone's attention is locked onto the outrage, something quieter is happening behind the curtain. Rights are disappearing. One policy at a time, one regulation rolled back, one liberty redefined. But no one's looking, because we're too busy shouting at each other. This tactic isn't new, bread and circuses. Diversions for the masses, while emperors tighten their grip. But today, it's evolved. Outrage has become the perfect smokescreen. It's free, it's addictive, and best of all, it's self-replicating. You don't even need to manufacture it. Just spark it, step back, and watch the fire spread. Think about how easily you're baited. A controversial statement, a polarizing opinion, a viral clip, and you're hooked. You comment, you argue, you share. You pour emotional energy into a battle that changes nothing. Meanwhile, something critical slips by unnoticed. Rights once assumed to be permanent become privileges quietly revoked. Protections fade, freedoms erode. You might think, but this issue matters, and maybe it does. But it's not the only thing that matters. It's not the entire landscape. It's a flare meant to capture your attention, while the real operation happens in the shadows. When you're outraged, you're distracted. And when you're distracted, you're vulnerable. Outrage hijacks your brain. It short-circuits logic. You stop asking questions. You stop listening. You split into sides, tribes, echo chambers. Us versus them, good versus evil. The nuance vanishes. And when nuance dies, manipulation wins. This is the genius of outrage. It feels empowering, but it makes you powerless. You think you're fighting, but you're playing your part in a script someone else wrote. You think you're defending your values, but the tools you've been given are designed to keep you reactive, not effective. And while you're stuck there, scrolling, reposting, debating, real power is being consolidated. Surveillance laws expand. Protest rights shrink. Voting access tightens. corporate loopholes widen. And all of it happens with minimal resistance, because you're too busy reacting to a controversy that was designed to keep you distracted. Even more insidious is how outrage exhausts you. The constant emotional spikes, the adrenal surges, the moral indignation. It drains your energy, your focus, your will to engage meaningfully. When you're outraged all the time, you burn out. And when you're burned out, you disengage. And that's when they've truly won. Not when you're angry, but when you're too tired to care. Ask yourself, who benefits when you're outraged? Who profits? Who gains more power while you waste time fighting shadows? Trace the money. Follow the laws. Look at the policy changes that happen while social media erupts over an influencer, a misstep, a scandal. This is not about left or right. This is not about ideology. It's about attention, and attention is the most valuable currency in the modern world. If someone can control where your attention goes, they can control what you miss. We used to guard our freedoms with vigilance. Now we trade them for the temporary rush of righteous anger. We used to read laws. Now we read comments. We used to question authority. Now we cancel each other. And all the while, inch by inch, the walls close in. You were never meant to see it happen. That's the point. You were never meant to notice. Because the scream of outrage is louder than the whisper of your rights disappearing. So the next time you feel the pull, the anger, the need to respond, pause, breathe. Ask yourself who benefits. Ask yourself what's being signed into law. What's being removed from public record? What's being quietly reclassified, while everyone's attention is glued to the outrage machine? Because if you don't start looking behind the noise, you won't see what you're losing until it's gone. You've been taught to think outrage is resistance, but real resistance is staying focused when everything's screaming for your attention. You want to protect your rights. Start by protecting your awareness. You're in a war for your attention, and if you lose that, you lose everything. You think you've been paying attention, but they've already redefined the terms of the battle. They've already changed the language, and you haven't even noticed what those words mean anymore. Redefining words sounds like a harmless game, an intellectual exercise at best. But in the wrong hands, it's one of the most potent weapons of psychological control ever devised. Take the word freedom. In a vacuum, it evokes autonomy, choice, power. But now think about how that same word has been twisted. Freedom becomes the justification for surveillance, for war, for denying others their basic rights. When authorities say you're free, what they often mean is you're free to obey, free to comply, free to choose between options they've pre-approved. The meaning doesn't just shift, it dilutes until resistance becomes incoherent. Control doesn't always come from force. More often, it's linguistic. If you redefine enough words, you can program a population to accept almost anything. Start with justice. Once a beacon of fairness, it's now a branding term, applied unevenly, used when convenient, withheld when powerful interests demand silence. When a system calls itself just while actively punishing truth-tellers and rewarding corruption, the word stops pointing to reality. It becomes camouflage. Then there's love, one of the most emotionally charged words in any language. But even that gets repurposed. Manipulative relationships weaponize love to guilt you into staying. Institutions promise love to keep you obedient. Entire ideologies twist it into a demand. Love your country, love your God, love your captor, until you're no longer sure if what you feel is love or fear dressed up to look noble. This is not coincidence. It's a deliberate strategy. Because once you distort enough definitions, you distort the battlefield itself. Resistance relies on shared understanding. Without it, there's nothing to push against. You can't fight injustice if you're told justice is already being served. You can't rebel against oppression if they convince you it's called order. You can't even describe what's happening to you if the very language you need has been hijacked. This is how control becomes invisible. They don't need to censor you if they can get you to censor yourself by confusing you so thoroughly. You no longer trust your own thoughts. If truth becomes whatever someone with power says it is, how do you know what to believe? If gaslighting gets watered down to mean any form of disagreement, the real tactic disappears into noise. And when words lose meaning, resistance loses form. You start accepting contradictions because they're all you've ever heard. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Compliance is freedom. You say them enough times, they begin to feel true. Not because they are, but because everything else has been taken from you, word by word. This isn't just about semantics, it's about sanity. Your ability to think clearly depends on language. Your beliefs, your identity, your boundaries, they all hinge on the words you use to define them. When those words are bent, twisted, inverted, your internal world starts to warp with them. What you once called abuse is now passion. What you thought was slavery becomes sacrifice. You begin to police your own mind without even knowing it. And the cruelest part, the more you adapt to this distortion, the more isolated you become. Try pointing it out, and you'll sound paranoid. Tell someone freedom doesn't mean what you think it does, and they'll look at you like you're the problem. Because they've been taught the same redefinitions, the same scripts, the same inversion of reality. This is how power sustains itself, not by silencing the masses, but by teaching them to speak its language. You were taught that words are tools for expression, but in the hands of power, they're tools for manipulation. If you can redefine truth, you don't need to destroy it. You just need to make it mean nothing at all. That's the game. Redefine, repeat, erase, and then tell you it was always that way. They don't need to burn books when they can burn meaning. And when resistance rises, they won't argue. They'll just tell you you're misunderstanding. You're overreacting. You're the one twisting words. And slowly you'll question your own clarity. Until finally, there's nothing left to resist with. Because resistance isn't gone, it's been rebranded. Just like everything else, if they can make you doubt your words, they can make you doubt yourself. And once you doubt yourself, they've already won. You're not crazy, but they need you to think you are. Because if you ever truly saw what they were doing, you might start to push back. You might start using your own words. And that's what they fear most. Because once you name the lie, you make it visible. And once it's visible, it's vulnerable. The moment you speak clearly, their power starts to fracture. And that's why they'll do anything to stop you. So keep your words sharp. Keep your definitions sacred. Because if you lose the language, you lose the fight. You've just begun to see how control distorts your world. But the next tactic is even more sinister. It's not just about changing the rules. It's about making you blame yourself for being trapped. Keep watching. The lies go deeper. You've been taught it's your fault. You're not happy? Then clearly you're doing something wrong. That's what they say. That's what they whisper through self-help slogans, corporate HR emails, and lifestyle influencers smiling through filters. The narrative is everywhere, subtle, constant, and suffocating. The implication is always the same. Happiness is a choice, and if you're not choosing it, you've failed. But here's the sinister twist. This isn't just bad advice, it's a weapon. A method of control disguised as encouragement. Because if they can convince you that your suffering is your own fault, they never have to fix the system that causes it. Imagine waking up exhausted, day after day, your job drains you. Your bills keep piling. Your relationships feel strained and performative. And still, you're told to practice gratitude, to manifest abundance, to change your mindset, not your conditions, not your exploitation, not the rigged systems. No, just your attitude. This is psychological gaslighting on a mass scale. It turns systemic failure into personal inadequacy. You're not unhappy because you're underpaid, overworked, or isolated. You're unhappy because you're not journaling enough, not meditating hard enough, not reading the right morning routine listicles. The truth is uglier and more liberating. You are not broken. The system is. Think about who benefits when you internalize your unhappiness. When you blame yourself, you don't blame your employer when you think you're failing. You don't question the rules. When you see your suffering as a personal flaw, you stay compliant, passive, quiet. This is how control works in modern life. Not through chains or cages, but through shame. Shame convinces you that your pain is a defect, that your dissatisfaction is a mental illness, that your exhaustion is laziness. You're told to fix yourself rather than your circumstances, to adapt rather than resist. They call it resilience, but it's submission. And when you do try to seek help, what do you find? Wellness products, coaching programs, online courses promising happiness in 6 easy steps. Your unhappiness becomes a market. Your suffering becomes their profit. There's no money in collective action, but there's endless money in self-blame. They don't want you to see that the reason you're unhappy might be because your job is meaningless, because your worth is measured by productivity, because your life has been reduced to a grind with no end and no reward. They don't want you to realize that maybe, just maybe, your unhappiness is the correct response to an inhumane system, because unhappiness in its purest form is information. It tells you something's wrong. But they can't let you listen to that voice. So they drown it out with toxic positivity, with slogans like "Choose Joy," as if joy were a product you could order with overnight shipping. They pathologize sadness. They medicate rage. They label discontent as disorder, when really those emotions are sane responses to an insane world. And if you do start to question, if you begin to look outward instead of inward, they have another trap waiting: guilt. You have food, you have a home. You're not in a war zone. How dare you feel anything less than grateful? So you silence yourself. You pretend. You smile. Because speaking your truth would make you seem ungrateful, unwell, unworthy. And so the cycle continues. You keep blaming yourself. They keep getting away with it. But here's the reality they don't want you to see. It is not your fault you're unhappy. It's not your fault you're tired. It's not your fault that joy feels distant and forced. You are reacting exactly as you should to a world that exploits, isolates, and overwhelms you. That reaction isn't dysfunction. It's your humanity refusing to die quietly. So stop carrying their shame. Stop swallowing their lies. Because the truth is not that you've failed to be happy. The truth is that you've been surviving a system designed to make you miserable and then blame you for it. And recognizing that, that's the first real step toward freedom. They told you it was your fault. Now ask, who taught them to say that? And who profits when you believe it? You'll want to know the answer, because the next lie is even deeper. You're not just told to blame yourself, you're told you chose all of it, even this. And that's where we go next. Imagine standing in a store, staring at 2 identical products. One costs twice as much. You pick the cheaper one, of course. But what if I told you both choices were fake, that the prices were set to steer you, not offer you options? That your decision, what felt like free will, was actually engineered. This is the art of manufactured choice, the illusion of freedom, carefully scripted by someone else. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. We like to think we're in control, that our decisions, big or small, come from some internal compass. But more often than not, you're being nudged subtly, invisibly, toward a choice that benefits someone else. This isn't conspiracy, it's design. Behavioral economics calls it choice architecture, and it's everywhere. Take your phone. The apps you open, the buttons you press, even the colors, they're arranged to steer your behavior. You scroll longer than you meant to, click things you weren't planning to. Every swipe, every tap was anticipated. The dopamine rush wasn't a happy accident. It was calculated, and you weren't choosing to stay. You were being kept. But it goes deeper than tech. Look at politics. You're given two parties, two sides, two paths, left or right, red or blue. It feels like democracy, like a choice. But what if both roads lead to the same place? What if the fight isn't real, but the illusion of conflict keeps you loyal, distracted, and pacified? What if your outrage is being harvested to keep you playing a rigged game? The trick is simple. Create a system where every option serves the system itself. This is how the illusion works. By offering choices that don't challenge the status quo, power structures remain untouched. You think you're making decisions, but you're picking from a menu they wrote for you. The only real freedom you have is to decide which illusion makes you feel most comfortable. It happens in relationships too. You think you're choosing love, choosing who you want, but social conditioning, media narratives, even family expectations have shaped what you find attractive, acceptable, or worthy of commitment. You didn't invent your desires, they were installed. And when it comes to your life path, your job, your identity, your beliefs, it's the same story. You choose a career from a list someone else curated. You choose a lifestyle based on ads you've seen since childhood. You tell yourself you're following your passion, but your passion has been gently, invisibly sculpted since you could form thoughts. Because here's the real twist. When someone makes you feel like it was your decision, you don't resist. In fact, you defend it. You rationalize, you explain. You become loyal to the very structure that limited your options. You become the guardian of your own cage, insisting it was your idea to build it. That's the genius of manipulation. Make you think you chose this, not through force, but through freedom, or the illusion of it. Because real control doesn't feel like control, it feels like consent. Think of advertising. It doesn't just sell products, it sells desires, values, identities. It teaches you what to want, and then makes you feel like you wanted it all along. You think you're the customer, but you're the product, shaped, targeted, and sold to yourself. And when you try to break out, when you question, rebel, resist, the system already has an escape route waiting. Pre-approved forms of rebellion, products marketed as edgy, lifestyles branded as authentic. You can even buy your revolution, shrink-wrapped and ready. And just like that, your resistance becomes another purchase. Another choice that never really was. So what do? Start by noticing, by asking, who benefits if I choose this? Question every default setting, every gut reaction. Because if your freedom is real, it should stand up to scrutiny. And if it crumbles when challenged, maybe it wasn't freedom at all. Because the most dangerous kind of control is the kind that makes you grateful for being controlled. You didn't ask for this cage. But now, they've convinced you it's home. They gave you a pillow, a TV, a window with a view, and told you it was your idea to stay. But what if the lock was always on the inside? And what if you're just now realizing you had the key all along? It's not enough to wake up. You have to walk out. Because the next illusion is already waiting, and you'll have to decide, again, if you're really the one deciding. You're about to learn that even your awakening can be commodified. Stay sharp. You haven't seen the full game yet. Not even close.